So thank you all for being here, joining us in person and online. My name is Andrew Redmond. I'm the director of the Mexico Institute here at the Wilson Center, and it's our great pleasure to bring together this seminar along with U.S. Pharmacopeia and with support of the U.S. Embassy in Mexico and AMELAF. And we're really happy to have all of you here, whether you're in person or virtually, and we're looking forward to this afternoon's conversation. We're going to start with a short presentation that my colleague Jerry Har and I are going to share with you, and then we'll move into the panel discussions. The global pandemic, as I think all of us know, raised awareness of supply chain challenges, especially North America's near-exclusive reliance for many important products, inputs, and ingredients on a single supplier, often based in Asia. Pharma, and particularly generic drugs, is a vivid example of this situation. It's certainly not the only one, as some of us just heard upstairs. But if there's a lesson at all from the pandemic, and I certainly think there are lessons, is that we need to strengthen our pharmaceutical supply chains here in North America, and in terms of the focus of this conference, between the United States and Mexico. So during this brief panel, Jerry Har and I will try to frame the issues and policy challenges that we'll discuss throughout the afternoon. The objective of today's event is to develop policy recommendations, as is our approach here at the Wilson Center, for government and industry that would contribute to a high-quality U.S.-Mexico pharmaceutical supply chain. Our presentation this afternoon is based on a discussion document that we'll share with you a little bit later on, and we'll appreciate any comments, suggestions that you might have. And then the idea is that we'll take that document plus the learnings and findings and recommendations that come out of this afternoon's event, and that will be combined into a final product, a final report of today's session. So Jerry and I are going to do a little bit of tag team back and forth in the next few minutes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with you all, and an honor especially since I've got great admiration for the Mexico Institute that you ably lead, and I appreciate the invitation to join you in this endeavor to providing a brief overview. I am a global fellow, besides being a full-time professor at Florida International University and an adjunct at Georgetown. I'm a global fellow of the Woodrow Wilson Center. I've authored a paper available to you if you would like to read it. It may help if you suffer from insomnia. No, actually, I did my best on that paper. It's on supply chains in North America. And of course, we do cover in-depth Mexico. You may find it interesting. The outlook for pharma globally, as you probably know, it's pretty bright, but it's laden with a number of large challenges. And those are going to be demographic, epidemiological, and financial. One of the characteristics, as I'm sure you are aware, is of the aging population worldwide, and that's especially true with regard to North America. Another characteristic in the outlook is the novel treatments for rare and specialty markets, the growth of biosimilars, and a downward pressure on pricing, and finally, the next generation of biotherapeutics. I'm not going to get into each and every one of those. That would be for a separate seminar, if you will, but just setting the stage a bit. Zeroing in on Mexico, one of the things that we do know is the challenges and opportunities there, especially with regard to foreign direct investment overall with respect to Mexico. We all know the big advantages of the proximity to the United States, the USMCA, the stable currency, the decent infrastructure, and some of the ongoing activities that the Undersecretary just presented to all of you. However, even though with $29 billion through the first half of 2023 in foreign direct investment, that's a 48% rise. But you need to look beneath the surface, and there is a blinking light, and that is that just 7% of the investment, foreign direct investment in Mexico, only 7% is new investment. The rest is reinvestment. So the big question, and I'm not going to attempt to answer that right now because it has a strong political dimension to it, is why reinvestment only? Why not new net investment? That is a big challenge, and that has impacts and spillovers to the pharmaceutical sector as well. With regard to pharma in Mexico, we're talking about a $7 billion market. Other emerging economies are interested in Mexico as well. One of the things we uncovered is that Indian generics, not only European firms, are very much interested in looking at Mexico for investment activities. Mexico City and the northern area of Mexico still dominate with regard to manufacturing facilities, and in the Mexico City area itself, 27% are manufacturing APIs. One other thing before I pass it over to Andrew, which is interesting, is some of the really good news is the recent tax incentives. Accelerated depreciation in a new law, 89% of that in 2024 is subjected to that. 10 sectors, including pharma, are subjected with the opportunity to take advantage of these new tax incentives. And to qualify, however, companies must prove 50% of their Mexican operation revenue are from exports. Again, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. There are some opportunities and big challenges in there, Tom, also. So where you stand depends upon where you sit in this entire endeavor. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, who's going to talk about nearshoring.
Thanks, Jerry. Where you sit and who asks you to dance is a cliche that a professor of mine used to use all the time, so it always makes me smile. So nearshoring, I mean, I think everybody here knows that the trend in favor of nearshoring, or sometimes referred to as friendshoring, ally shoring, this is really, I think, in part a response to the Trump and then Biden administration's policies toward China, which drove manufacturing out of China, including to the Mexico or the Western Hemisphere, as well as other countries. And then obviously part of the nearshoring trend relates to the COVID pandemic that we've mentioned before. Mexico attracted $35 billion in foreign direct investment in 2022, and an additional $29 billion through the first half of this year. But as Jerry mentioned, a lot of this is reinvestment. It's not greenfield investment, and I think the truth is a lot of that investment was happening not because of what the Mexican government did, but in spite of it. In other words, companies responding to external factors, not to the incentives like the one that Jerry just mentioned, which I'm sure I'm anxious to hear what the companies think, but I'm sure is a welcome change in the Lopez Obrador administration policy. Mexico, of course, has a number of advantages. Most, if not everyone here, knows what they are that make it an attractive investment destination. There are also challenges. I'm talking generally, but I think they probably by and large apply to pharma as well as other sectors. Jerry mentioned some of these: Mexico's geography, Mexico's logistics connections to the United States, which is the world's largest consumer market, a large internal market of its own, an extensive network of free trade agreements, a stable currency, and a far better record with ESG compliance in comparison with some other countries. And I think that's something that we don't always focus on. And obviously the private sector reps here know that investment is not just based anymore on the cheapest labor. There are all kinds of other factors, and Mexico is competitive in some of those. It doesn't mean that Mexico's ESG record is perfect, obviously. One of the areas where Mexico still has work to do, and I know the current government and all of you know this, relates to things like corruption and weak rule of law and the high rates of impunity that we see in Mexico. The appreciation of the peso obviously drives up costs. As I mentioned, the current government has not, up until last week with this new incentive package, has not really given the impression of being really open to business, to foreign investment. There is insecurity, as I mentioned before, relating to things including even hijacking of cargo and delayed response times in terms of regulatory approval. But that all said, I don't want to suggest that Mexico is not a good place to invest or there's not huge potential, because I think the net is that indeed there is great potential, and I think we're going to continue to see that. And the nearshoring does create, as we talk about in the paper we're going to share with you, a number of reasons or ways in which nearshoring actually will help us to have more secure supply chains here in North America. Congress is looking at this, including in, for example, the legislation proposed by Senators Cassidy and Representative Salazar, the America's Trade and Investment Act, which looks at not only U.S.-Mexico, but the whole hemisphere. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as we talk about today about how we strengthen supply chains. So Jerry's going to talk a little bit more about supply chain resilience generally, and then I'll wrap up.
I believe you're muted.
Sorry, thank you very much. Okay. Talking about supply chain resilience, I turn your attention to the very interesting article you can find and download online. As a matter of fact, it's the best I've seen on this topic on supply chain resilience by McKinsey. And McKinsey says to really be able to develop, sustain supply chain resilience, there are 4 key elements, so I'll share those with you. We can discuss those later if you like another time. One is end-to-end, and again, this is through the lens of the business perspective. End-to-end transparency, how products are developed, how they're delivered and stored. That is one of the key elements. It's essential in this whole scheme for resilience. The other is routine stress testing and reassessment. That's using planning and simulation models to see to gauge slowdowns and shutdowns throughout the system on supplies and patient medication. Another one is reduced exposure to shocks, balancing just-in-time with just-in-case inventory management. We saw that during the pandemic. Just-in-time was the coin of the realm prior to that. Since that time, it's been you need to have a residual capacity, you need to have contingencies, you need to reopen that warehouse you shut down years ago when you believed in the God of just-in-time. You need to have a backup, you need to have a reserve, you need to have that second parachute. That's what that's all about. And the exposure, reduced exposure to shocks, again, that relates to just-in-time and just-in-case. A good example is Biogen. Biogen's recovery from Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico is a good example. They were able, in laser-focused time, to move that production to a plant in Kentucky so they would not have the sustainable interruption. I call it sustainable interruption because a lot of factories could not recover in time due to that. And the fourth element in supply chain resilience is to get the executive structure in the company to get on board with this and to appreciate the other 3 elements that I just mentioned in that regard. I'm going to sum very quickly. The bottom line, as I see this for this, is a couple things. The U.S. and Mexico urgently need to strengthen their supply chains. 2 reasons. Competition from Asia. That's not just China. I said Asia because China, over the years, due to their increased cost structure, have moved a lot of their manufacturing over to Vietnam, to Malaysia, Taiwan. It's going out of that area and essentially into Southeast Asia, rather. So it's Asian competition and the pandemic itself. So to strengthen a supply chain resilience and diversify the sources of supply, especially for API and the finished products, the U.S. and Mexico can employ both carrots and sticks. Carrots, one of the things that I would agree to is carrots are like tax and regulatory policies and industrial policy initiatives. The CHIPS and Science Act in the United States is a perfect example on a really aggressive, muscular industrial policy targeted in that area. The Buy America, Buy Mexico purchasing requirements for this, certainly at least a minimal percentage of medicines for the public health hospitals and the militaries. That's one area where there's not going to be a lot of quibble over industrial policy, I believe. And the other thing with regard to sticks is this could include tariff increases and tighter, stricter regulatory requirements for compliance. Again, I'm mentioning this. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying a combination of carrots and sticks certainly is a way to improve the resilience and the competitiveness here. You're going to see in a report that Andrew's going to share with you I guess you're going to send it to them, is that right?
We're going to share copies, hard copies in just a moment.
Okay, you're going to see a terrific SWOT analysis there done by Dr. Sergio Ulloa. He's a distinguished Mexican pharmaceutical expert. I'm sure you know the name here. And in this SWOT analysis, he talks about certain weaknesses that in this endeavor must be addressed. Those include the competition from Southeast Asia that I mentioned, underinvestment by the multinationals, subpar energy, water, public safety, and security. Don't ignore infrastructure. That is critically important to all industries, and it's going to be especially important to pharmaceuticals. Low investment, he cites, in pharmaceuticals, and poor alignment between pharmaceuticals and pharmaceuticals. Those are the things in the SWOT analysis must be addressed. There is, Andrew didn't mention it, we should though, is the goal of Biden administration is to have 25% of API sourced from the United States. Which period of time is that, Andrew?
Is it
2025. Yeah. That's one of the things with regard to industrial policy as well. So I'm going to stop right there and turn it back to Andrew.
Thanks, Jerry. So just to wrap this part up, I think what we've laid out and what many of you already know is there are a number of policy questions that have to be addressed in order to strengthen the pharmaceutical supply chain, both in the U.S. and Mexico. And I'm sure there are others beyond those that I'm about to mention. One, I think, is the role or the relationship between pricing and greater supply chain resilience. And in other words, if production is more expensive in Mexico and the U.S. than it would be in other markets, is that a trade-off that policymakers want to make? Another is regulatory changes that would facilitate supply chain resilience. And we'll hear from both FDA and COFEPRIS in a moment. It'll be interesting to hear about the steps they're taking individually and in concert to build resilience. And I think industry views, obviously, on how that should work and maybe things that could be done by the regulators in order to expedite approvals while ensuring quality and safety is something that doubtless will come up today. And then the last one that comes to mind is the role of non-government actors in cooperation and coordination mechanism. We have here today largely representatives of government industry, but there are, of course, many other stakeholders, patients, distributors, public and private sector, purchasers, et cetera, whose views will have an impact on the success of the public policies that come out. So I think as a next step, as we start to think beyond even this afternoon of how do we engage those other actors in follow-on discussions. So those are just some of the policy areas I think we'll touch on today. With that, we're going to rearrange the name cards here and turn it over to my colleague Tony, who will moderate the first panel. So thank you all for your attention.
Do you want to sit here?
Yeah, would that be, why don't, whoops. Do you want to do it from there? How do our panelists feel? If you want to stay where you are, we can do that. Does that work? I don't hear any complaints. All right. Okay, then we won't make anybody move. So Tony, with that, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Jerry, and thank you for the work and that you've done to tee up this discussion. We really appreciate that. I am delighted to moderate our second panel session on regulatory frameworks, initiatives, and policies for geographic diversification of the supply chain. A resilient medicine supply chain can be defined as one that withstands acute disruptions so that safe quality medicines are supplied to patients around the globe in adequate quantities when they're needed. Channeling investments and policy reforms to ensure resilience depends in part on access to data and insights that allow a better understanding of both the upstream and the downstream elements of the supply chain so that we can address potential vulnerabilities effectively. At USP, we see supply chain vulnerability as being influenced by 4 key drivers, which alone or in combination can increase a medication's risk for shortage. These 4 primary drivers of vulnerability include geographic concentration. It's a big part of what we're sort of addressing today, I think. This driver refers to the concentration of medicine manufacturing in specific regions or countries. should say medicine and API ingredient manufacturing also. Manufacturing complexity, which relates to the intricacy of pharmaceutical manufacturing processes and production methods. Price-related factors, which Andrew mentioned, significantly influence supply chain vulnerability. And quality challenges can be a significant cause of drug shortages as well. So understanding and addressing these key drivers is essential to enhancing supply chain resilience and preventing drug shortages. I sort of see that building supply chain resilience as in a way, the hard part, to think ahead about how you prevent bad things from happening, such as drug shortages. So it's a future-oriented way of looking at the supply chain challenge rather than only a risk mitigation at the time the risk happens. So I think let's try in our discussion to think about both. Both are important. Geographic diversification is an important solution, a really important underlying solution to reduce vulnerability. And we're here today to discuss some of the initiatives at a policy level that can help diversify the manufacturing base further, especially between the U.S. and Mexico. So I'm pleased to moderate a great panel of experts. And I'd like to introduce them, and then we will go to each participant and ask them to offer 5 to 7 minutes of comments, and then we'll have a dialogue. So to introduce our first panelist, Maria Julia Mary-Neeson, who is a health attaché at the U.S. Embassy and acting director of the U.S. section of the Border Health Commission and the Department of Health and Human Services. Kevin Webb, who's Chief Operating Officer at the API Innovation Center. Lee Verbois, Director, Office of Drug Security, Integrity, and Response at the U.S. FDA. And Vimla Raghavendran, Vice President of Informatics Product Development at USP. All of our panelists have very impressive biographies. If I read through them, it would take 20 minutes. So they are on the website for the meeting. So with that, I think I will turn to Maria Julia to offer comments.
Great. Tony, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Andrew and Efrain, for the invitation. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there given some other commitments here in Mexico City at the embassy. I'm sure that during lunch and now, you talk a lot about the challenges that we had with supply chain during COVID. I think it was one of those experiences that really opened our eyes to the reality. I mean, many of the things we knew about it before, but COVID really put us face to face with the problems of not having a resilient supply chain. I got to live that in Mexico City as the attaché, just was here a month before COVID started. And it was really a challenge in terms of the response from the public health perspective, but also politically in terms of the challenges that the lack of supplies created during COVID. I think I want to talk today a little bit about some of the HHS efforts to build a resilient public health supply chain. And I'm going to mention briefly where we are in collaborating with Mexico and also Canada on these topics. So again, as I say, we have all types of shortages of public health supply chains during COVID, from early on, the lack of access to diagnostics tests, later on PPE, as you all remember, personal protective equipment, the masks, ventilators was a huge issue, and then much later in the game, access to vaccines. And access to vaccines means not only have the final product, but access to all the ancillary supplies that are needed to manufacture the vaccine. Clearly, with all the concerted effort of the government and the private sector in the United States, halfway through the pandemic, we were in a much better shape in terms of making assets available, supplies available. But clearly there were also a lot of vulnerabilities. So in July of 2021, the government, through HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and VA, the Department of Veteran Affairs, issued or launched the National Strategy for a Resilient Public Health Supply Chain. That was mandated by an executive order, and I invite you all to read that 86 pages strategy because it's very telling. Basically, the strategy showed the government vision to protect the health and the health security of our people in our country by ensuring that these supplies were available at any needed time. And the strategy has three main goals. Number one is to build a diverse, agile public health supply chain, sustainable, with manufacturing capacity available for products for future pandemics. The goal number two is to transform the ability of the government to monitor and manage that supply chain through stockpiles and through visibility and engagement with the private sector. And the goal number three is to establish standards, systems, and a governance system, basically to manage that supply chain to ensure that there is a fair and equitable allocation of scarce resources during pandemics or other health security events. The strategy is built on three key elements, which are robustness, visibility, and agility. And I think this goes over some of the issues that you just mentioned in Andrew's and Jerry's remark. I mean, robustness involves mitigating the risks in supply chain before a crisis happens, and this means to expand the industrial manufacturing base so we have access to those manufacturing lines, but also involves, in the United States, manufacturing in the United States, but also involves working with international partners so there is no dependence on a sole region or regions of the world in terms of access to products. And this doesn't apply only to finished products. Some of you mentioned also the APIs and the equipment and everything else that is needed to make these products available. Agility or improved agility is the ability to adapt and scale rapidly in time of crisis. It means that we had to have enough stockpile materials so we can distribute them easily at the onset of a crisis, but also that we have a warm base manufacturing capacity in a way that those lines of productions for a set of products are ready to go and to scale up as needed. Obviously, this is easy to say, not that easy to implement. And then obviously improve visibility is the last factor here. Visibility means that we all need to know what we have and who has it if we don't have it domestically. That comprehensive understanding of the public health supply chain in the United States is critical to respond to future emergencies. Obviously, in terms of the recommendations that we want to make going forward, and obviously look forward to the discussion with this panel, we obviously need to sustain investment in the domestic manufacturing. Andrew, you mentioned that, easy to say, not that easy to sustain. We need to build a much more robust stockpile that comes with many challenges, and I'm sure we can talk days and days about these. We need to maintain that visibility on what we have and what we may need, and all together these efforts are required to be prepared for the next emergency. Obviously, we can talk domestically all we want, but as COVID reminded us all, diseases know no borders. And having all these capacities or an absolute nearshoring doesn't change the fact that we're going to face global crisis and that we are going to need to collaborate with partners. During COVID, as I say, I arrived here in December of 2019, and in January 2020, we were having the first meeting of the North American Plan for Animal and Pandemic Influenza, which is a trilateral framework launched by the leaders of North America more than a decade ago. And this was our sole initiative to come together with the health, the security, the agriculture, and the foreign affairs sectors to maintain visibility throughout COVID, to share best practices, and to learn from one another what we were doing and why. Through the NAPAPI contacts is that we were able to work of years, NAPAPI contacts of years actually. We were able to work quickly with Mexico and help open the market for diagnostics, for ventilators when they didn't have any access to them. And later on, led to the donation of 17 million doses of vaccine to Mexico. It's not again that Mexico didn't have the ability to buy vaccines. They immediately set up the contracts with the manufacturers, actually with 7 different manufacturers. It was the issue of us having most of that manufacturing capacity bought for our own purposes. And this obviously has a national security reason, but also has national security implications, especially for example, border communities in the US-Mexico border, when we were having vaccine on one side and not on the other, when we were having diagnostics on one side and not on the other. So it created all kind of public health problems and also, as you all know, friction. We can go on and on with the stories, but just want to let you know that in December of 2019, we had the last meeting under NAPAPI on our work for pandemic supply chain networks. We were working under the long-term vision of creating North American pandemic supply chain network, kind of a vision of having a marketplace where you can go and Google in a platform, sorry for using the wrong word, searching in a platform for the products that you will need to respond to a pandemic and be able to do acquisitions. But there were multiple challenges. There were challenges about what were the regional requirements? What does the United States needs? What is that Mexico needs? What Canada needs? We couldn't agree on what the requirements were. Requirements for what type of assets, what type of supplies, for what threats. So we started to work with WHO on creating a set of commodity packages for 10 different threats and the unknown threats to be able to understand what we need to respond to, what we needed to respond to each of those threats, and then have a list of supplies that we needed. We have huge amount of issues with the regulatory harmonization or convergency. I know my colleague is going to talk about that. If we were in a North American supply chain network, what were we doing or what we needed to do to make sure that manufacturers didn't need to regulate, to register the product or license the product differently in each of the countries? We were talking about this harmonization of requirements of convergency so, we can address the regulatory barriers. Even the need to mobilize product rapidly across the 2 borders, or the 3 if we consider Canada and Mexico, how we will do to supply those products rapidly so the supply chain could be maintained. And definitely the most difficult issues were about IT and proprietary information. Who will hold such a database? Who will collect the data? Under what protections the manufacturer's information will be protected? So we were addressing all these issues when COVID started, and the rest is history. Now, I guess to finish, and on a couple of good news, you probably have seen in the fact sheets or the communiques of the North American Leaders Summit that we have undertaken trilateral lessons learned exercises, the 3 countries together, all these 4 sectors that I mentioned. And we have conducted these lessons learned, and clearly pandemic supply chains came up as one of the key issues that need to be addressed. I can't put the cart before the horse, but we're hoping that when the leaders meet for the next North American Leaders Summit, hopefully soon, there will be announcements about our new framework for pandemics and health security collaboration, including the issue of the supply chains. Meanwhile, stay tuned and happy to participate in the panel and in the discussion because we have tons of things to say about this. So thank you so much, Tony, and over to you.
Thank you, Maria Julia. Greatly appreciate it, and we will be back with some questions. Next, let me turn to Kevin Webb from the API Innovation Center for for comments.
Thank you, Tony, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Webb. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the API Innovation Center located in the middle of the country in St. Louis, Missouri. The API Innovation Center is a nonprofit public benefit corporation whose focus is identifying critical medicines that have no U.S. source of API or medications that are heavily reliant on countries such as China and India for the availability of these medications. The United States is heavily reliant on other countries, OUS manufacturing, for not only of our APIs, but then also our key starting materials. One of the things I forgot to mention, though, is that when ASPR published their report back in around May of 2020, looking at reshoring or strengthening domestic manufacturing, the number one risk that ASPR identified was the lack of coordination, bringing together the entities to strengthen our domestic manufacturing. That is what the API Innovation Center does. We're not a manufacturer. We're not a research organization. What we do is identify the critical medicines that needs to be reshored, and then we identify then the molecule research organization. We identify the equipment manufacturers. We identify the API manufacturer. We identify the finished drug manufacturer, and then we identify the supply chain participant. This now becomes a project team, and this project team now is responsible then for developing a new route of synthesis for the drug, moving it from a batch to a continuous flow or advanced manufacturing capabilities. We develop the equipment around that supports that new manufacturing process. We then drop the equipment into the API manufacturer, and then from there it goes into the drug manufacturer. So at every point of the way, from the entire process, everybody has a role and responsibility. It's one thing to strengthen or look at advanced manufacturing or strengthening domestic manufacturing. What we need to do is be able to make sure that drug actually gets into the supply chain and ends up on pharmacy shelves and gets into patients. You just can't produce new drugs and using new capabilities without them actually being utilized. So our goal then is to identify critical medicines that meet this criteria and then put the project team around it that is both at a regional and a national level. But because of our national security, it's not just a pandemic that creates security risk. It's environmental events such as hurricanes. But what we're also looking particularly at are what we call critical choke points, where you have a single unit or a single entity that is representative of a potential supply disruption if that one individual or that one company should fall down or have an inability to supply. And what we're finding is that particularly when it comes to API, you may have multiple finished dose manufacturers, those who actually make the tablets and the pills, but all those companies source their API from one company. That now becomes a critical infrastructure supply chain risk that needs to be addressed. So as we look at, what is it that we need to do to just assess the infrastructure that we have before we start getting into policies and how do we look at new ways of making drugs, we just need to assess, where are we at? What are our capabilities right now as a nation? We published a study back in September of 2022 where we interviewed the senior leadership of over 37 large pharmaceutical companies, generic manufacturers in the United States, who represented 25% of our nation's drug supply. Most of those facilities had half of their manufacturing lines idle. That was a very glaring moment, where it's not a question of would we need to build new, bigger factories and new chemical plants. The matter at hand was, how do we repurpose our idle manufacturing capacity before these companies continue to shut down, and before these companies shut down and continue to move then that manufacturing offshore? We can do that. These companies that we spoke to can repurpose these lines within 1 to 2 years, solving the critical medicine supply or the essential medicine supply in the United States is not an issue where it can't be done. We can do it. We have partners willing and ready to do it. It's just a matter now, what are we needing to do at a public-private partnership to get them to the point where they can repurpose their lines and start doing what they do best, and that's to make medications. We also realize that, through this public-private partnership, and I caution those individuals who may say that the best way to do this is just to continue to lower cost. That's a loss leader. As we've seen and heard in their opening comments, if it's not India, it's going to be Taiwan. If it's not Taiwan, it's going to be Cambodia. Someone will always find a lower way to produce the medication. What we advocate for and what we advance our focus on here at the API Innovation Center is looking at new advanced ways of actually manufacturing the cost. How can we lower production costs so that we can still offer a competitive wage where we're not trying to have a better price margin by having lower living wages? We're still adhering and support environmental regulations. But if we can drive down our production costs with new manufacturing processes and transition from an inefficient batch manufacturing, which is prone to challenges, it's not an friendly way of actually making drugs. There's a lot of employee safety issues. It takes up a very large footprint. But if you can consolidate this down to a advanced manufacturing program that the equipment we're using right now will fit on this table, and you can create an entire year's worth of supply using advanced manufacturing in a footprint that fits in this room. The value proposition, though, is that these are new jobs, that these are new technologies. These are new life paths or career pathways that didn't exist before. And so while the investments that we're making in new technology may seem counterintuitive, particularly for old generic medications, if we can improve and reduce the production costs, we've created new advanced ways of manufacturing drugs that now creates career pathways for individuals that doesn't require an advanced degree, doesn't require a college degree, a university degree. Most of these jobs use technicians or technical skills. We just need people who understand how to program, who can do the data analytics, who can fix the machinery when it breaks down, but not necessarily those that have to be scientists in which they are running and how they're running that. Where to start? I mean, this seems to be one of the age-old questions, is that, this is a big problem. There are over 2,500 to 2,800 molecules registered with the FDA. We can't possibly reshore all of them just with our limited infrastructure capabilities right now. In the United States, we only have 3 API manufacturers that are capable of producing more than 30 molecules at any given time. We just don't have that infrastructure. So it's going to take time to build that up. So to get to, for example, it was brought up earlier, the president's bold manufacturing our report, which we fully support, we endorse, and actually we're doing a whole panel discussion on this next month, is how do we achieve as a nation the president's and the OSTP's objective to produce 25% of our nation's API using advanced manufacturing in this country when that infrastructure is still in its infant stage. So we have to take the baby steps. We have to work with nearshoring. We can't possibly do all of this on our own. But by leveraging the assets and the partners that we have in the Western Hemisphere, this is a doable situation. But in order to achieve that goal of 25%, that's roughly 700 molecules. As I mentioned, we just don't have those manufacturing capabilities, but we have the infrastructure to do it. We can repurpose the sites and the manufacturing lines that we have. We can do it using advanced manufacturing. It costs anywhere between $5 to $8 million to develop a new route of synthesis and use an advanced manufacturing for an API. So this can all be done with approximately $3 to $4 billion, which is a far cry from the $600 billion that the nation spends on its pharmaceuticals on any given year. And this can happen, and we can do this within a couple of years. So I will then just go on to add that, that only gets us halfway there. developing the infrastructure, developing the capabilities, developing the new manufacturing processes, training and creating new life skills for individuals that can then be replicated in other industries, only gets us to the point, but this has to be sustainable. We have to, but it's not sustainable by relying on the federal government for funding. The federal government's going to have to support this transition for the next 3 to 4 years. But where then this can start dialing back and allowing now the commercial sector and the private sector to take ownership of this is and where they then can continue to make investments now into new technologies is identifying then how do you incentivize those manufacturers to do what they do best, and that is to make drugs. There has to be quality metrics. Right now, we have a race to the bottom with the generic manufacturers. The average revenue for a generic manufacturer on a 30-count tablet, or excuse me, a 30-count bottle is $1.50, roughly a nickel. 1 nickel is what the manufacturer is receiving for every bottle of 30-count bottles that they sell into the market. They just don't have the margins to be able to invest into a new technology or new advanced manufacturing. But we can get them there. If we can then, as a public-private sector, develop the equipment that gets placed into their manufacturing sites and that allows them to continue to manufacture drugs, that is what's going to allow them you can sustain them, but there has to be quality metrics that we now then require of the manufacturers that they have to continue to manufacture their sites without warning letters from the FDA. They have to have been readily inspected by the FDA within the past 12 months or 24 months. What they need to do is demonstrate as a manufacturer their commitment to adhering and continuing to comply with CGMP practices. We need to reward that behavior by making sure that nearshoring or onshoring manufacturers have preferential placement on federal contracts. DOD, TRICARE, CMS, Medicare, Medicaid for U.S. source manufactured goods. We need to make sure that there is a higher reimbursement rate for some of these U.S. sourced drugs. It doesn't necessarily have to be tax or tariffs that are the carrot and the stick approach. We can create economics around how we manufacture and then how we distribute, then how we pull these drugs through in the supply chain that values not only the manufacturer, but ultimately values the patient. That's the main thing, is that what are the patients who need these medications are getting access to it that's affordable, but still allows then the product to be manufactured here in the United States. So let me stop there. I appreciate the opportunity to provide some opening comments and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kevin. You gave us a lot to think about there. And when I was listening to what you were saying, I sort of was thinking there's a lot of not either ors, but and alsos here. And, thinking about the short, medium, and long term, and how do we build a more resilient supply chain over that period of time. And it actually reminded me, and I'm sure we'll hear more in the panel that follows, about Javier was talking about their new facility that Pisa's built, the 4.0, Pharma 4.0 facility, and how advanced it is, and in a lot of ways that advanced manufacturing is being integrated into the supply chain, but leveraging those efficiencies is critical, no question. And with that, Lee, can we hear from the U.S. FDA, Lee Verbois?
So first, I just want to start off by thanking the Wilson Center, specifically the Mexico Institute, the U.S. Embassy, AMLAF, and the United States Pharmacopeia for convening this important conversation and for having the forethought to bring together regulatory organizations to the conversation also. It's really meaningful to have a diverse group of individuals coming together to think about this very important conversation. I also recognize my esteemed co-panelists for being part of the conversation, and for those who came before me and are going to be speaking about this after me. It highlights the multifaceted nature of the problem that's before us, and also heightens the conversation in terms of how we're speaking about supply chains. In advance of COVID, we were not coming together in such a multifaceted way to talk about supply chains. We had a very, I would say, narrow focus on the way we spoke about supply chains. And post-COVID, we are bringing together a very different group of individuals to think about the complexity of the way we need to address this problem. So I want to highlight the role that collaboration plays between academia, non-governmental organizations like USP, and governments to ensure that there is critical momentum necessary to introduce stable policies and practices and ensure that public health is achieved through distribution of safe, quality, and effective medicines. That's what we're here to talk about today. And it's really exciting to have everyone in the room that meets those needs. It's truly not enough for governments to harmonize policy approaches and communicate these policies with industry. We really have to be here together to address the concerns across sectoral approaches. We have to think about the economic needs that are at play and really understand how those are interweaving with our regulatory approaches. And if we don't understand the complexity associated with all of these pieces, we're missing the boat. And I think that's what's really important with the conversations that we've been having both today and in advance in a recent dialogue we had on an APEX supply chain toolkit that really help us get to the heart of the issue that we're communicating about. FDA works very closely with manufacturers and other parties to understand and identify potential issues in the pharmaceutical supply chain. We do this to prevent, detect, and mitigate supply chain issues as early as possible, and ensure that the impact on supply chain issues are intermittent, that we're addressing these as early as possible, that understand whether or not it's impacting supply or demand, and that we can really understand the impact from a patient perspective. We do this by engaging with stakeholders through meetings, through calls, through emails, and we do it to really understand how we can understand it through gathering information, but also through sharing. So we recognize that we play a pivotal role in this space, not just by gathering the information from industry or from patients, but by making sure that we're providing information to key stakeholders to ensure that active change can be made. But we also believe that regulations and regulatory frameworks, which are modern, transparent, predictable, and rooted in a thorough understanding of science and risk, best position us all to protect and promote public health. We think that we really need to be at the forefront, and you've heard this already from a number of the panelists and those who spoke earlier during lunch, that we really need to be sharing information as much as we possibly can, because holding back is not going to help us get to the best possible outcome. If we don't understand the data of products that are moving through supply chains, organizations can't make their most effective decisions in terms of the products that should be manufactured or where those products should be best positioned. So I know I'm speaking rather quickly, but while a regulatory authority or organization may be able to make decisions, or we may have additional information that we can move forward with, we may not have all the information we necessarily need, and we need to work in concert with others. We also don't have all the resources that we necessarily need to make those decisions or to move forward. So we need to work together to address these challenging issues. We need to do it through harmonized approaches where possible to come together to protect and promote health. This will reduce inefficiencies, reduce cost associated with duplication of efforts, and ensure that we're meeting the needs, not just of our communities, but of the global community. So it's through meetings like these that we're having today that we believe we'll be better able to strengthen partnerships Those partnerships could be global partnerships with international regulatory authorities. They could be partnerships with non-government organizations, or there could be partnerships with academia. We believe strongly that we are able to do our jobs best when we're working in concert. We will understand ways in which we can share data more strongly because we'll better understand the type of data that each of us need. And it will decrease the inefficiencies that we have within our supply chains. So international regulatory cooperation is strengthened when regulatory agencies and other organizations have common objectives. We've been talking about our common objective. It seems pretty clear within this meeting, but we rely on similar information, and we should be pretty clear about what that information is and what those data elements are when we're making our decisions, because only through that clarity will we be able to make our decisions as quickly as possible, and that's what will, in the end, save us time, save us energy, and save lives. So that's all I have, and I know there's a lot of questions that you've already prepared, but I look forward to that further discussion.
Thank you, Lee. We'll be coming back to you. And now to Vimla Raghavendran, who my colleague at USP, share some speaking information and data.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I am the only panelist, I think, with slides. So if I may turn your attention to the screen. So my role on this panel, what I was asked to do is, several panelists and speakers have talked about the challenges of geographic concentration. And what I wanted to do is provide some examples of how that plays out in the US market, and in particular, the relationship between production concentration and drug shortages. And if anyone's been watching the US news anyway, drug shortages are at a 10-year high in the US. It's definitely, it's not a new issue here, but it is something that has really been front page news. And there has been a lot of discussion recently about, what's driving that. And that's prompted a lot of the policy papers and discussions that we've been having. And so what, I wanted to do is really bring that evidence base. So like I said, my goal here is to give you a few sort of hopefully compelling examples of how production concentration plays out. But I also wanted to talk about the role of low prices, and particularly the interplay between low prices and drug shortages in the US context. Tony talked about, we've had this program since 2020, the USP Medicine Supply Map, where we're bringing sort of data to the question of supply chain risk and drug shortages. And what we found is that, while every drug shortage has its own sort of unique story, there are some commonalities. Tony's talked about them, manufacturing complexity, production concentration, and then low prices. I want to emphasize that these are all very interrelated concepts, right? And they're all ultimately about economic pressure and economic pressure on margins for manufacturers. So manufacturing complexity, it is more expensive and it is more difficult. I think people in this room can appreciate this, to make more complex generics. So this could be, sterile injectables. This could be certain types of therapeutic classes like antineoplastics and antibiotics. I'm going to be showing you some data on that. And so when you have a drug product that's more expensive to make, that puts pressure on margin. And then when you have low prices on top of that, that again compresses margins, and then the way that manifests is through production concentration, because the way manufacturers can make production feasible is through economies of scale, right? And so you see that across, several drug classes. Some of them are very critical, essential medicines. So like I said, I'll share some data, and I will also talk about low prices, because ultimately the solution has to address that underlying economic issue, right? So you can't just say, hey, let's diversify the supply chain. The solution ultimately, I think, some of the other speakers have spoken about this, needs to be addressing that underlying economic challenge, which is low margins for manufacturers. So next, actually, I could do that. All right, so just a little bit about the basis for this analysis and the caveats to the findings, if I may. So the USP Medicine Supply Map, as I said, this is a program that USB started in 2020. It's essentially a database, and what we're looking to do is identify, characterize, and quantify risk in the upstream pharmaceutical supply chain. We have data, but we're also generating insights, and the goal is to help stakeholders. This could be manufacturers, hospitals, distributors, governments, the US government, can use this information to prioritize investments in supply chain resilience. Goes without saying, I suppose at this point, but supply chain insights, are sort of critical to help answer the question of, where to focus investments and how to make them effective, right? So you want to be able to quickly point to what is the size of the risk and what is the extent of the damage if there's a port shutdown in China. You want to quickly be able to say what medicines are impacted. And you want to be able to find a way to prioritize drugs and say, okay, well, this drug in particular is vulnerable because it has low prices, or maybe because it is very complex to make. And so, those are the types of insights we're looking to generate here. Where we are right now, we've mapped about over 90% of U.S. approved drug manufacturers. We've mapped them to actual facilities, and we're working on trying to identify where the API manufacturers are located as well. We've done that for about 44% of U.S. approved labels, and then we build predictive models that will tell you what is the risk at a drug product level of a drug going into shortage. Update this. Some of them, these data sets are updated daily, but we issue a monthly report. So I'm going to share an analysis on oncology medicines. And what I wanted to do is identify the sort of most essential oncology medicines. And I used this paper that was published in The Lancet in 2021. So they identified a list of, they basically surveyed over 1,000 oncologists around the world, and they said, if you could only pick 20 medicines for your government to carry as part of the sort of government healthcare program, what would those be? And then their responses were rank ordered, and globally, this was the list that these oncologists came up with. It was the same list that the oncologists from high-income countries came up with. So it represents sort of what a treatment protocol in a high-income country might look like. And these were the 20 most essential medicines. And you can see 4 of them are on the FDA drug list. And all of them have, so the USB supply chain vulnerability score, I'll just spend a second on what that is. So as I said, we build predictive models that predict the risk of drug shortage. And so what you see here is the risk of drug shortage. So if you have a 93% score, that means that there is a very high likelihood that you will be in drug shortage a year from now. So you can see here, 4 of these are already in shortage, and several of them have very high drug shortage risk scores. As a point of comparison, the average U.S. drug product has a risk score of about 20%. So these are high scores for some of the most essential oncology medicines. Why is that? One factor is production concentration. We've talked about that. So, when we looked at where these drugs are made, and remember, we mapped production to facilities, we found that for 14 out of those 20 medicines, over 40% of their production was concentrated in one facility. Why is that important? We've had several issues. Just in the last year, we had one company that chose to shut down production after an inspection that caused, a sustained shortage of several of these oncology medicines. That was one facility. We had a tornado hit another facility, and that, has impacted drug shortages for several essential medicines. We had another facility shut down because of financial bankruptcy, again causing a massive cascade of events. And this was just in the last year. So this is a real challenge. Looking across production. So some of these facilities are massive facilities, right? And they're making multiple drugs. So a facility shutting down doesn't impact just one medicine, it impacts a slew of medications. And we saw that with that India-based facility shutting down or choosing to temporarily shut down production in January. So you can see here this, just as an example, one US-based facility makes, about half of the fluorouracil, 20% of the dexamethasone, 17% of the cisplatin, 7% of the doxorubicin for the US. And if there was if there was any impact on that facility, there would be massive repercussions for treatment regimens across. And several of these drugs, remember, are used as substitutes for each other. So, you're in real trouble. I wanted to provide another example. I picked antibiotics because, that they're with oncology meds, a lot of them are sterile injectables. These are mostly oral medications. I just picked the top 5 most frequently prescribed antibiotics in the US. And you can again see, the data isn't as stark as we saw with oncology medications, but there is still significant production concentration. And, that in several of these cases, there's one facility basically that makes many of these drugs. I did want to make the point about price. So this data, it's a little bit more difficult maybe to absorb, but I'll just take a second here. So it's broken out by injectable and oral solids. And what I've done is you can see the price point on the x-axis and just the number of NDCs or the of medications on the y-axis. And you can see, so you can see it's pretty stark data actually. So the drugs that have been in shortage are all like on the furthermost, like the most left-hand side column, right? So these are the cheapest drugs, and this is just the essential oncology medicines. You can, just do sort of, so of those 20 oncology medicines I examined, the ones that are in shortage have a price point of about $2 per unit. That's less than what it took me, what I paid to take the metro here from my house 20 minutes away. Whereas the average price for these drugs, granted several of them are sort of sole source monoclonal antibodies, is like $1,400, right? So there's a big difference there. And that is an issue that needs to be addressed ultimately as a root cause of a lot of these drug shortages. So these are just some of USP's recommendations. We have a policy paper on supply chain, drug shortage, a list of policies around that. This is just a sampling, I think, that caters towards the topic here, the need to build early warning capabilities. We need a vulnerable medicines list ultimately to target investments. And the need to really have targeted strategies that focus on what's driving the drug shortage. So in some cases, it might be having long-term contracts. In other cases, how can we diversify supply and so forth. So I don't know if I've probably gone over. But
Okay, it was good.
yeah.
Thank you, Vimla. I mean, it's an impressive and meaningful amount of data, I think, that shapes the dialogue. I got one question for you, and we have like a lightning round of just a few questions. We have a hard stop at 3. But are there anything particular you'd like to share around what we know about KSMs and concerns there?
I will share that what we know is that we don't know much at all, right? It's really sort of a black box. And I don't believe any single entity understands and has a full map of the end-to-end supply chain, I think, to use that phrase someone else used, going all the way back to key starting materials. USP started doing some work with some government agencies, but there's a long way to go on that front.
Thank you. Lee, very quickly, can you share anything about any existing FDA platforms or other resources for companies interested in seeking FDA approval to market in the U.S.?
So I see that I'm probably going to get one question, right? So let me just kind of wrap this up in a pretty box.
Go for it.
So there's a lot of different ways that companies can work with the U.S. FDA. The U.S. FDA has a bilateral relationship with COFEPRIS, and I think that there's different ways in which companies within Mexico should be leveraging the work that we do very carefully with COFEPRIS. They should understand that the strength between regulatory relationships comes from working to make sure that they're using internationally harmonized approaches. That's first and foremost. There's also ways in which we can they can leverage work that's been done through either ICH, which is the internationally recognized bodies, but also we're doing work on supply chain through APEC, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. That's a medical product supply chain toolkit. And there's a lot of ways in which information can be found through there. But I'd also say that we have an office that's in Mexico, in the embassy. And when I reached out, because I'm not just here by myself, when I reached out to my office in the embassy, they indicated that there's a lot of interest in really developing partnerships with academia and understanding how those relationships can be furthered to ensure that capacity is deepened, and to ensure that those relationships are furthered not just with academia but through our embassy counterparts. So if there's questions that you have, if there's ways in which you're not feeling that you understand the regulations, that our counterparts, my counterparts in the U.S. Embassy, can really make sure that you have the information you need, because we do have, if you're a small company, we have portals, we have information on small businesses that you can access to ensure that we're effectively building tools and effectively building out pharmaceutical capacity around the world. Do you have any follow-ups?
No, thank you, Lee. Thank you.
Okay.
It's terrific. Kevin, do you have any advice for the Mexican industry looking to be nearshoring partners given the dynamics of the U.S. generics market as you described them?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And listening to the presentation, if I was sitting in your seat, I'd be listening for the opportunities. there are significant opportunities that we as an industry still need help on, particularly KSMs, key starting materials. As Mava had just mentioned, there is very little information on key starting materials, where they're manufactured. And that is an area that I think creates opportunities because there's different ways to be able to get to that. Now, granted, some of these are rare earth minerals. Some of these are only found in certain parts of the globe. But there are also key starting materials that in our early analysis shows that there are some common starting material that's used in multiple different APIs. So it's not every API or every drug has its own unique set of KSMs. There are some commonalities, and that now creates just a subset. There are also different KSMs that can be produced using synthetic manufacturing or synthetic chemistry. So you can do that in laboratories here or within laboratories within your own country and provide an incredible value to the chemical companies and to the manufacturers of the pharmaceuticals as well. So I see that as creates opportunities. But then also, if you're looking at just drugs in general or the API, is that we have an over-reliance on countries that, if there's a changing political environment, that quickly now become, access to these molecules becomes challenging, such as China. In that, there are drugs, critical drugs, many of our antivirals and many of our antibiotics are not sourced here in the United States. That I would look at a subset of drugs that you really want to focus on and create opportunities there as well.
Terrific. Thank you, Kevin. And finally, let's go back to Maria Julia, where we started. And my question, we heard Lee talk about some of the resources available in the embassy and at FDA. Let me take it up a level and just ask the question if are there adequate binational, bilateral frameworks for a discussion about how to really better integrate the U.S. and Mexican supply chain to take advantage of the opportunity?
Great question, Tony. And yes and no. We all heard the different complexities on the different fields of this, and it comes to mind some work that is being conducted by the Texas A&M University. They have a Center of Excellence for Cross-Border Threats for Homeland Security. And they've been working on supply chain in general, not specifically pharmaceuticals. But they took a product or a particular asset and map out, the end-to-end process to make that product available. And there were more than 250 pain points for a single product, going from the manufacturing of the product itself, the products, the ancillary supplies, the active ingredients, pharmaceutical ingredients, but also everything else that you need. You need the market, you need the transportation, you need the security, you need the distribution, you need the regulatory framework that my FDA was calling about. So it's very complex, and I would say that there was some work done under the high-level economic dialogue. I know that we have Dr. Schwartz here, and FDA were involved in working on this regulatory convergency or harmonization to make sure that there is a level field there for industry to play. But it's very challenging. And then at the trilateral level, specific for health security or pandemic supply chains, we have the NAPAPI, the North American Plan for Animal Pandemic Influenza, that now is going to be launched into a broader framework. As I say, I can't say much yet. The issue is that without that high-level commitment and a very clear public policy about this, it's very hard to move forward. This is a multi-sector, multi-stakeholder effort. It has many angles. It has, as I say, the regulations, the industry, the security, transportation, you name it. The nearshoring, the offshoring, the mapping of the actual supply, And most importantly, as I say at the beginning of my presentation, what the requirements are. I mean, what do you need? What do I need? The systems are different sometimes. The threat landscape, for example, if we talk about health security, is different. Access to the health care system is different, and as such are different the type of pharmaceuticals that you need. So without those very high level public frameworks at the highest level of the government, and I would say here the president, in the case of Mexico and the United States, it's very hard to have the power to move forward and convene all the sectors that need to be at the table. So we do have it now on the health security side of the house. With NAPAPI, we wanted to do a pilot with, the pandemics supply chain to then expand to the pharmaceutical, but it's very hard, and we need more policies at the highest level in all the other aspects of the supply chain. Some very clear mandates and some clear leads and empowerment to move forward with the dialogue that is needed, particularly when we're talking about supply chains across borders.
Great, thank you, Maria Julia. That is a call to action, I think. We have a lot of policymakers and agencies around this table, so it makes perfect sense. At the same time, there's that old expression that defining a problem and understanding is halfway to solving it. And it sounds
Right.
like we at least halfway understand the problem and what we need to do to build more supply chain resilience. So I think that is the glass half full. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Andrew, and I think we ended almost exactly on time.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a great panel. Thanks to you, Tony, for moderating, and all the panelists for their interventions. Let's give them all a round of applause for that. And I'm just making sure that Secretary Buenrostro and Commissioner Svarch are with us before I introduce them. Okay, I feel like we should have hold music or something. They're good? There they are. Okay, great. Well, it is really a great pleasure to introduce Secretary of Economy Raquel Buenrostro and Federal Commissioner Alejandro Svarch. And let me quickly share their bios with you, and then we're going to turn it over to them. They have a joint presentation. So Secretary and Federal Commissioner, thank you. It's wonderful to have you with us. They will speak in Spanish, so we do have translation equipment, so if you need it and don't already have it, please grab one. Secretary Raquel Buenrostro has more than 25 years of experience in public administration, where she has held, among other functions, Deputy Director General of Budgetary Control at the Minister of Finance and Public Credit, Hacienda, Planning and Development Manager at Petróleos Mexicanos, and Deputy Treasurer of Fiscal Policy in the government of Mexico City during the administration of current President López Obrador. At the beginning of the present administration, she participated as head of the senior officers of Hacienda, of the Minister of Finance. From January 2020 to October 22, she was head of the Tax Administration Service, or SAT, and as of October 7th of last year, 2022, she was appointed as Secretary of the Economy by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. She obtained a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the National Autonomous University of Mexico and a master's degree in economics from El Colegio de Mexico. And Alejandro Ernesto Svarch Perez is the Federal Commissioner of COFEPRIS, the FDA equivalent. Dr. Svarch is a surgeon by training. He too attended UNAM and has also studied global health diplomacy at the State University of New York. He previously served as National Medical Coordinator at the Health Institute for Well-Being, or INSABI, where he was responsible for the recruitment and training of health professionals. From 2018 to 2019, he was Director General of International Relations at the Secretariat of Health of Mexico. And on February 16, 2021, he assumed his current role as the Federal Commissioner for the Protection Against Sanitary Risks, or COFEPRIS. So, Secretary and Federal Commissioner, again, wonderful to have you here. We're going to turn it over to you. We understand you have a PowerPoint presentation, which we're looking forward to seeing. So thank you for being with us.
La presentación todavía no. Sí, buenas tardes. Un saludo a todos. Es un placer estar aquí compartiendo con ustedes. Y de acuerdo a la invitación, platicaremos el tema en dos partes. Uno correspondiente a medicamentos y las APIs y otro relacionado con la parte regulatoria. Y está aquí efectivamente con nosotros el comisionado Alejandro Sbarch. Bueno, déjenos decirles que México es uno de los países más grandes y más poblados de Latinoamérica y destaca también por sus características y su posicionamiento económico, el que ha tenido y el que está teniendo, no solo en Latinoamérica, sino todo el mundo. Tiene la particularidad que nosotros en esta administración tenemos como una política de administración pública dar el derecho universal a la salud. Esto implica garantizar los servicios de salud no solo tanto a las personas que tienen ya un régimen de seguridad social, sino también a todas aquellas personas que no son derechohabientes. En este sentido, uno de los elementos más importantes para alcanzar este objetivo de política pública es garantizar medicamentos gratuitos a toda la población. Como ven, dado que lo que busca México es garantizar medicamentos gratuitos a toda la población, como parte de la política pública, pues México se va a ocupar de ser uno de los mercados más grandes de medicamentos en Latinoamérica. Este fortalecimiento de la industria en medicamentos va a tener dos grandes ramas, que es lo que se haga con inversión pública y lo que se haga con inversión privada. Con relación al sector público, les platicamos que México ya ha observado a lo largo de su historia en el sistema de salud, en algún momento se fabricaron ya vacunas, biológicos, medicamentos, incluso se llegó a crear una instancia gubernamental para que trabajara con este objetivo, con este fin. Después fueron limitando y acotando sus funciones, quedando primero como una comercializadora y después meramente como una operadora logística. Nosotros tenemos como objetivo en la administración darle un giro a esta entidad paraestatal para que embone en este proyecto de administración pública que es garantizar medicamentos a todos, que de la mano con una obligación muy específica que está en la Ley General de Salud de México, que establece que como política nacional la de los medicamentos. Entonces, ese es un pendiente que nosotros tenemos como gobierno y es dar cumplimiento y tener una estrategia para cumplir con esta política nacional que es la gratuidad de los medicamentos. En ese sentido, el gobierno en que está trabajando, bueno, lo que queremos hacer en la administración pública y se está trabajando, el sector salud ha estado trabajando en eso, es primero crear y fortalecer y participar en la industria farmacéutica nacional como sector público. Estamos pensando en algunos medicamentos estratégicos como son vacunas, biológicos, oncológicos, antirretrovirales, inmunoglobinas, factores de coagulación, hemoderivados, entre otros. Y lo que nos queremos orientar muchísimo, como es darle prioridad a la parte de salud pública, es trabajar en todos aquellos, también fortalecer el mercado de los genéricos. Todos estos para el fortalecimiento de la salud pública. También se está trabajando en la implementación de un esquema comercial que promueva también la industria tanto privada como nacional. Que esto tiene que ver, va de la mano con todas las atribuciones que tiene ahorita México como un gran atractivo para atraer inversión privada. En ese sentido, nosotros hemos estado trabajando el sector salud ha estado trabajando focalizándose en productos como lo son los antibióticos, antiparasitarios, desinflamatorios, analgésicos y soluciones. Otro tema es la implementación de un puente comercial con los principales empresarios fabricantes de ingredientes de APIs, de todas las sustancias activas que están principalmente en India y China. Se quiere propiciar un diálogo para establecer plantas productivas en territorio nacional y así tener los insumos directamente en territorio nacional. Esto ya lo ha estado trabajando el sector salud con algunas empresas en India y en China. También la otra parte que se ha estado trabajando y que ustedes la conocen muy bien es propiciar un esquema de armonización entre las agencias regulatorias, entre las farmacopeas, como uno de los mercados más grandes del mundo, que son el de México y el de Estados Unidos. Todos estos esfuerzos que se han orientando en ambos países, necesitamos tener un reconocimiento pleno de todo nuestro marco regulatorio para que sean no solo afines y congruentes, sino también, en su caso, complementarios. Para concluir, quisiera comentar que hay que resaltar que los insumos médicos que se plantea fabricar por parte del Estado serán de naturaleza genérica, primordialmente, y los medicamentos de alto consumo, así como los ingredientes activos, las APIs, se harán en el marco de la estrategia con las empresas de mayor prestigio en el mundo. Y aunado a eso también, lo que tenemos es, por otro lado, que no es propiamente medicamentos, también estamos trabajando en atraer inversiones para todo el complemento de lo que son dispositivos médicos. Y para continuar, para dar un poco más de especificidad a los avances que se han tenido en el marco regulatorio, le voy a pedir que al doctor Svarch que nos platique cómo vamos en ese punto. Ahora sí, la presentación, por favor.
Bueno, muchas gracias y muy buenos días y muchas gracias por la invitación. Quisiera agradecer en primer orden a la Secretaría de Economía, a su titulada, a la maestra Raquel Buenrostro, quien nos ha permitido y nos ha invitado a acompañarla en esta reunión en la sede de la Secretaría de Economía del Gobierno de México. Muchas gracias, secretaria. La relación que ha construido COFEPRIS con la Secretaría de Economía, de mucha colaboración y de mucha confianza, refleja el papel estratégico de la regulación sanitaria el día de hoy. Yo creo que nunca antes se había hablado de regulación sanitaria como en estos tiempos de pandemia, lo cual nos ha permitido avanzar en cultura sanitaria y nos permite seguir profundizando algunos conceptos de interés en esta mesa. Siguiente, por favor. Bueno, en este espacio de diálogo que ofrece esta tarde el Centro Wilson representa una oportunidad que tenemos como sector salud también de poder explicar de la mano de la Secretaría de Economía el proceso de transformación que vive el ecosistema regulatorio del Estado mexicano. En esta breve presentación trataré de exponer un aterrizaje operativo de la estrategia que como política de Estado se implementa en la Agencia Sanitaria del Estado mexicano para brindar certidumbre regulatoria. La certidumbre regulatoria, que quizás puede ser el mejor concepto para llevar a casa, construido de la mano de la Secretaría de Economía, nos propone abonar en el acceso sin olvidar los elementos fundamentales de la protección contra los riesgos sanitarios. Asimismo, a través de esta presentación, quisiéramos invitarlos a que pudiéramos pensar de forma conjunta cómo podemos aprovechar esta coyuntura para que como pares y como colaboradores y como articuladores de las cadenas de suministro podamos seguir optimizando nuestra estrecha colaboración. En COFEPRIS conocemos bien esta cadena que sin duda nos conecta como nunca antes en la historia, pues autorizamos, vigilamos, regulamos y distribuimos para el desarrollo desde la publicidad hasta la industria en importantes sectores como son el sector farmacéutico, el sector de dispositivos médicos, el sector de los cosméticos, de los plaguicidas y por supuesto el sector alimentario. Siguiente, por favor. Aquí pueden ver ustedes las industrias que representan inversiones millonarias en ambos lados de nuestra frontera, lo que nos obliga a pensar en estrategias que cada vez nos permitan ser más ágiles y efectivos en el ejercicio de la regulación sanitaria, sin perder el rol rector de protección a la salud y a la par podamos avanzar bajo un camino de facilitador en ideas innovadoras hacia estas industrias que ciertamente van en crecimiento. Lo hacemos a través de iniciativas innovadoras y procesos de digitalización y sobre todo con una amplia colaboración tanto con actores nacionales como es esta importante Secretaría del Estado mexicano, la Secretaría de Economía, además con nuestros homólogos de la FDA, con quienes buscamos nuevas formas de aplicar el compliance y la convergencia regulatoria. Siguiente. Este impacto económico, como comentaba, exige un balance que nos permita cada vez ser un motor de innovación y de inversión y sobre todo de acceso a más insumos para la salud. Tras 5 años del proceso de transformación de la Agencia Sanitaria del Estado mexicano, buscamos recuperar este balance para ser una autoridad abierta, transparente, digital y sobre todo justa en cada uno de los criterios técnicos científicos que utilizamos para el ejercicio de la regulación sanitaria. Siguiente. Esta transformación la han caracterizado 3 palabras: ser una COFEPRIS cada vez más ágil, ser una COFEPRIS cada vez más justa y ser una COFEPRIS cada vez más transparente. Esto se ha logrado gracias a estrategias disruptivas que buscan eliminar cualquier espacio de corrupción, ordenar procesos regulatorios y sobre todo homologar nuestros criterios con las agencias regulatorias del consorcio de ICH. No estamos inventando el hilo negro, como se dice en México. Seguimos las prácticas de las mejores agencias regulatorias del mundo, como la FDA, como la EMA, como INVIMA, sobre todo, y una nueva infraestructura digital robusta nos ha permitido digitalizar aproximadamente el 30% de nuestra carga tramitológica. También el objetivo de dar certidumbre regulatoria en nuestros tiempos de atención. Bajo este propósito buscamos redefinir el papel de la autoridad sanitaria, que antes estaba muy cerca de las ventanillas y muy alejadas de las necesidades de nuestros usuarios. Siguiente. Esto se aporta en 4 acciones claras que quisiera compartir con ustedes. Primero, en un marco regulatorio claro y transparente que obedezca las mejores prácticas regulatorias. Segundo, en criterios públicos y difundidos de todas las partes interesadas y accesibles de forma fácil. El tercero son espacios libres de cualquier posibilidad de corrupción o de conflicto de interés, donde fomentamos una relación directa entre el regulador y el regulado, pero siempre bajo principios que garanticen la libertad del conflicto de interés, sesiones videograbadas, con registro, documentadas. Y por último, un compromiso que sobre todas las cosas busquen proteger a las personas, ejercer la rectoría del Estado y velar por la salud de carácter público. Esto ha sido especialmente importante en estos 2 sectores, el sector farmacéutico y el sector de dispositivos médicos. Siguiente. En estos 2 buscamos contribuir con una región autosuficiente que atraigan cada vez más investigación e innovación y sobre todo que permita el acceso a tratamientos a mejores precios. Esto lo hemos logrado gracias a la digitalización, que está a punto de superar los primeros 200,000 trámites en menos de un año, y la eliminación de barreras técnicas gracias a la optimización regulatoria y a la aplicación del compliance con la FDA. Siguiente. Por último, no quisiera dejar esta oportunidad, esta importante invitación para hablar algunas reflexiones sobre el Nearshoring sin recalcar algunas reflexiones de inicio. Nosotros nos encontramos en un punto A y queremos transitar a un punto B de la regulación sanitaria, donde existan condiciones de convergencia regulatoria y condiciones de optimización regulatoria. Esto ocurre no producto del azar y no producto de un salto del punto A al punto B, sino que COFEPRIS y el Gobierno de México avanza en una trayectoria que permita transitar estos 2 la dimensión de entrada y la dimensión de salida, el punto A y el punto B. El espacio estratégico de esta reunión es poder comentarles que la autoridad sanitaria del Estado mexicano se transforma y está avanzando con enorme certidumbre hacia una trayectoria donde podamos mostrar ecosistemas regulatorios estables, mecanismos transparentes de nuestra gestión y eficientes de la gestión del gobierno regulatorio. El Nearshoring nos permite colaborar como pares en Estados Unidos y México, como COFEPRIS y como FDA, en una nueva visión que permita una visión de país que resulte en respuestas oportunas sin sacrificar el rigor técnico, una política industrial articulada entre sectores, instituciones regulatorias y, por supuesto, nuestra Secretaría de Economía para agregar valor a la cadena de suministro y, por último, en una visión internacional que permita la convergencia regulatoria y la autosuficiencia sanitaria. Siguiente. Desde COFEPRIS y las más de 19 sectores de la economía que regulamos, estamos comprometidos con esta visión y conseguir trabajando para promover una regulación sanitaria cada vez más ágil, justa y transparente en estos sectores. Siguiente. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Gracias, secretaria Buenrostro.
Muchas gracias, secretaria y comisionado, por sus intervenciones. No sé si tendrían tiempo para responder a algunas preguntas o observaciones.
Sí, adelante.
Bueno, okay. Does if anybody has questions for the secretary or the commissioner? We have translation, so you can ask in whichever language you're comfortable. I see a hand way in the back. Could you maybe, if you could come forward and pick up one of the microphones, that way everyone would hear you better. Thanks.
Hello there. My name is Ujwala Pluri, and the question that I have is, with regards to green trade and sustainability, what sort of initiatives is the Mexican government planning to take, especially with medical equipment, pharmaceutical products, and APIs, to ensure that, we're able to deal with climate change, reduce the environmental carbon footprint, and also better track, monitor, and, monitor where these products are coming from and any steps that the government is taking? It'd be appreciative to know. Thank you.
Sí, buenas tardes. Pues nosotros sabemos que el cambio climático y la transición energética es inminente y por lo tanto no solo nos estamos aplicando en la industria de dispositivos médicos, sino en toda la industria. Cuando empezó esta administración, el 21% de la generación eléctrica, por ejemplo, era limpia. Cuando terminemos en 2024, considerando la conclusión de los proyectos de energía que están actualmente en construcción, que son fotovoltaicas, tenemos una granja fotovoltaica que es una de las más grandes de América Latina, alcanzaríamos el 35% de generación eléctrica. Adicionalmente a eso, estamos apoyando mucho a la industria para cuando haya clústeres, por ejemplo, industriales y necesiten generación eléctrica limpia, puedan tener abasto, lo que le llamamos aquí en México por la ley abasto aislado, es decir, su propia generación verde, su propia generación limpia, y en ese sentido, siempre y cuando no haya interconexión al Sistema Nacional de Transmisión y Distribución, sino como sea de autoconsumo. Y adicionalmente dentro de las políticas que traemos de desarrollar ciertas industrias estratégicas, están promoviendo aquellas que son inversiones, digamos, sostenibles, que tienen la mejor relación tanto con el medio ambiente como con las comunidades. Estamos tratando de promover proyectos y impulsando proyectos, apoyando proyectos con economías circulares, también de hidrógeno verde y otro tipo de industrias que todas están orientadas a la protección del medio ambiente y de las comunidades, además de hacerles llegar los recursos suficientes y necesarios que también sean verdes y limpios. Muchas gracias.
Other questions? Okay. Well, then I'll pose one. Señora Secretaria, el gobierno de López Obrador acabó de emitir un decreto con algunos incentivos para la inversión en ciertos sectores, incluso los de fármacos. Posiblemente podrías compartir un poco del concepto de parte del gobierno o cuáles son los en más detalle los incentivos y cómo esos conectan con la política en general de promover nearshoring en esa administración.
Bueno, primero comentar que este decreto lo acaba de emitir la Secretaría de Hacienda. A ver, me voy a ir un paso atrás, perdón. Como parte de toda la relocalización, obviamente lo que nosotros nos queremos orientar es a la sustitución de las importaciones que vienen principalmente de los mercados de Asia. Una vez identificado todos aquellos productos y bienes, partes de la cadena de suministro, los suministros que vienen de Asia y que llegan aquí para abastecer principalmente la región de América del Norte, identificamos cuáles eran los sectores industriales estratégicos para ello. ¿Y cuáles fueron esos sectores estratégicos? Bueno, los sectores estratégicos, como bien saben, la parte fundamental es la eléctrica y la electrónica, y de ahí, pues lo que está muy vinculado a lo que nos interesa en esta parte de América del Norte, tiene que ver, por un lado, que tiene que ver también con la transición energética, la electromovilidad, el tema del sector automotriz con sus autopartes, también toda la parte de semiconductores, siderurgia y metalurgia, y ahí la parte farmacéutica y electrónicos y dispositivos médicos, y también electrodomésticos. Esos sectores para nosotros, para México, son los prioritarios. Y en ese sentido hemos construido una red de trabajo, tanto al interior del gobierno de manera transversal, como con el sector privado de México, de Estados Unidos y de Canadá. Y estamos alineando ahí los incentivos para identificar muy claramente cuáles son las cadenas de valor donde participan todos estos productos, identificar cuáles son los suministros de los cuales somos en este momento como región de América del Norte no somos suficientes para empezar a desarrollar esa proveeduría o invitar a empresas aquí a México o a Estados Unidos o a Canadá y complementar la cadena de valor. Voy a utilizar un ejemplo, por ejemplo, en el caso de los semiconductores, que es un ejemplo muy claro y que nos sirve muchísimo. Los semiconductores, Estados Unidos tiene mucha claridad de cuál parte va a desarrollar en la parte de Arizona y en algunas zonas ya que ya tiene ahí en California. Entonces, nosotros lo que estamos trabajando con el gobierno de Estados Unidos y con el sector privado es identificar la cadena de valor, ver qué parte de la cadena no se va a desarrollar en Estados Unidos y empezar a desarrollarla aquí en México. Y todo esto se está fortaleciendo, pues no solo con atraer la inversión por las condiciones y la estabilidad económica, sino también con el talento humano, pero también con ciertos incentivos. Los incentivos fiscales están orientados, como lo hemos platicado con el secretario de Hacienda, para estos sectores. Estos son los sectores que queremos promover. Ahí nada más un detalle. Estos incentivos, y lo tengo que comentar abiertamente porque seguramente nos acompañan muchos expertos, estos incentivos fueron emitidos por la Secretaría de Hacienda, tienen un detalle de carácter técnico, hay una precisión que le hicimos la observación al secretario de Hacienda, porque está acotado, por así decirlo, a las empresas exportadoras. Esta restricción tiene que abrirse para hacerlo congruente con todos los tratados internacionales. Vamos a sacar una adecuación, pero En lugar de restringirse, se va a ampliar el apoyo. Y estos apoyos fiscales están destinados a estos sectores estratégicos para atraer en un principio la inversión. Y por otro lado, aquí en la Secretaría de Economía estamos trabajando y estamos platicando también de alguna manera con el gobierno de Estados Unidos, con el Departamento de Economía, con la secretaria Gina Raimondo, para ver de qué manera complementamos también otro tipo de incentivos tanto de Estados Unidos como de México para promover ciertas industrias aquí en México. Y nosotros estamos pensando y estamos trabajando que tendremos para fin de año más o menos un paquete de programas ya sectoriales orientados precisamente a estos sectores industriales, que son programas ya ahora sí de fomento industrial, que tiene que ver con un paquete que incluye también medidas arancelarias, pero también facilidades de facilitaciones de comercio que vendrían complementadas con los incentivos fiscales. Todo esto va a armar un paquete de fomento a estos sectores que nosotros identificamos como estratégicos y que son prioridad no solo para México, sino para toda la región de América del Norte. Entonces, estos incentivos fiscales son parte de los instrumentos de fomento industrial que queremos sacar aquí en México antes de fin de año, que son los compromisos para redondear una política industrial muy focalizada y que está orientada precisamente al fortalecimiento de las cadenas de suministro de América del Norte y a tener una menor dependencia del continente asiático.
Gracias.
Perdón.
Una reflexión adicional, si me permite, la secretaria, que me gustaría compartir con ustedes, es que la cadena de suministros de medicamentos y dispositivos médicos de nuestra región, la región de América del Norte, tiene una característica muy única respecto a cualquier otra región del mundo. Y es que los 3 países que forman la región de América del Norte tienen agencias regulatorias nivel 4 y tienen agencias regulatorias con un único matriz de armonización regulatorio basado en ICH. Esto nos da una condición única de certidumbre regulatoria para incentivar la innovación en nuestro país.
Gracias, comisionado y secretaria. Are there any other questions? Okay, en este caso quiero agradecer a Secretaria Buenrostro y Comisionado Schwartz por su participación virtual hoy en día. Espero que en algún momento podamos recibirles aquí en el Wilson Center, pero hasta ese momento muchas gracias por su participación.
Muchas gracias por la invitación y cuenten siempre con...
So our second panel, we heard from government, we heard from USP, we heard from Kevin Webb, so we heard from sort of expert analysts and government, and this final panel is really focused on a response or perspectives from industry. Eduardo Gonzalez Pierre, who's a former Undersecretary of Health in Mexico and a global fellow with us here at the Mexico Institute, is going to moderate the panel, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to go in Spanish, given our moderators, so switch back and forth. La idea es que podamos hablar en español o en inglés, como se sientan más cómodos y que podamos tener una discusión ordenada. Quiero empezar por agradecer al Wilson Center y en particular al Mexico Institute, Andrew. Este es un tema muy sentido y en el que eres un experto, entonces te felicito por esta sesión. Tenemos una sesión de un grupo muy experto, muy conocedor. La industria farmacéutica, sobre todo en México, ha tenido una gran tradición de participación en la política pública y en este caso se ha formado un panel que tiene un balance muy importante. Tenemos por un lado la representación de la industria nacional a través de Juan Villafranca y también de Javier Aceves como productor, y del otro lado tenemos también la industria internacional Cristóbal Thompson por parte de AMIF nos acompaña y también Constanza Lozada. Entonces, la idea es tener una discusión también balanceada desde las perspectivas tanto de la industria nacional como de la industria internacional. Tenemos un espacio de 1:15. Entonces, lo que me gustaría es dedicarle unos breves minutos a, de alguna forma, a fijar un poco el panorama de lo que hemos escuchado. Siempre es un beneficio tener la última sesión porque podemos reaccionar no nada más a nuestro tema, sino también incorporar la discusión muy rica que tuvimos en el panel anterior. Después de esta pequeña introducción mía, pasamos en el mismo orden en el que estamos en la agenda. Sería una ronda de 5 minutos para cada uno de los ponentes con sus perspectivas. Después, dependiendo de la discusión, podemos hacer una breve réplica. Y quisiera dar el espacio, si estás de acuerdo, Andrew, a que pudiéramos abrir el foro a una discusión amplia. Algunos de nosotros nos quedamos frustrados por no haber podido participar en el panel anterior, porque son muchas las dudas. Entonces, a lo mejor podemos recoger mucho de esta discusión en este panel antes del cierre. Empezamos entonces. Yo lo que he visto es una discusión muy importante de un tema que no es nuevo. La integración de la cadena de valor de la industria farmacéutica es un tema que ha estado en la agenda en México durante mucho tiempo, desde los procesos de integración. Quizás lo que es nuevo es el contexto de que hay riesgos más latentes sobre la viabilidad y la confiabilidad de las fuentes de suministros, y que eso nos hace revisitar y volver a tratar de entender lo que está pasando y formas en que se pueden abordar. Ahora, esa nueva replanteamiento viene de por lo menos de tres tendencias. La situación geopolítica que hemos vivido en los últimos años, sobre todo de países claves de suministro de precursores químicos, el tema de riesgos pandémicos, que lo vimos muy latente en los últimos años, cambio climático es otro que también se ha mencionado, puede haber otros, pero estos tres grandes temas no son específicos a la industria farmacéutica. Son temas que, por supuesto, impulsan el concepto de nearshoring, la necesidad de diversificación de fuentes, pero no son especiales a la industria farmacéutica. Entonces, algo que hay que plantearnos es qué es especial de la industria farmacéutica en este tipo de riesgos que hace particularmente atractivo el tener a México como un socio comercial, y qué cosas pueden o no pueden darse dependiendo de este contexto específico de la industria farmacéutica. Ahora bien, si no ha habido una integración de la cadena de valor y ahora sí se podría dar una integración de la cadena de valor, ¿cuál es ese nuevo contexto de políticas? ¿Cuáles son los costos asociados o beneficios asociados que puede hacer que ahora sí funcione? Creo que una discusión muy importante es qué es lo nuevo que sí puede catalizar el cambio del nearshoring. Hemos escuchado mucho de cómo podría suceder. Lo que no hemos escuchado tanto es por qué debería de suceder y cuáles son los argumentos. Como economistas siempre lo ponemos todo en términos de costos y beneficios. Hay costos asociados a una rediversificación de fuentes de suministro, pero también hay beneficios asociados. Estaba hablando con Juan hace unos minutos. Envejecimiento de la población hace que tengamos ciertos padecimientos que son más susceptibles a fallas de suministro. No es lo mismo tener poca confiabilidad en un analgésico o que tenerlo en un medicamento de cáncer, como nos explicaron en la presentación anterior por parte de la USP. Entonces, yo lo que le pediría a los ponentes es si pudiéramos brevemente platicar un poco de por qué el nearshoring hace sentido en cadena de suministros, en particular qué de nuestras industrias hace que esto sea una agenda muy prometedora, y segundo, ¿qué es esto que deberíamos de considerar en términos de costos y beneficios? Antes de plantear los cómo se debería de integrar, hay que plantear si hemos hecho el suficiente trabajo para argumentar que tiene sentido, que la inversión vale la pena, que los fundamentales están ahí para poder movernos hacia adelante. Es la parte de abogacía para lograr el buy-in de los stakeholders para que podamos promover estos apoyos tanto de gobierno como de sector privado para que las cosas sucedan. Entonces empezamos contigo, Juan.
Sí, muchas gracias primero a Wilson Center por la invitación. Es algo muy importante para AMELAF el estar aquí presentes el día de hoy. Y para los que no saben, AMELAF representa 45 laboratorios, todos 100% capital mexicano, cerca de 80 plantas en distintas zonas de la región. Hoy vienen con nosotros algunos directores dueños de laboratorios que han estado viniendo ya, han estado viniendo a Washington con nosotros. Y yo quería comentar un poco desde el punto de vista de AMELAF cómo surge todo esto. Esto surge de manera paralela a la pandemia, ¿no? Nos lleva a un nuevo contexto donde empieza a padecerse de manera muy grave la cadena de suministro. La industria nacional estaba básicamente trabajando en un esquema de confort donde tenían un mercado que funcionaba muy bien, tenían también proveeduría que funcionaba muy bien, y de repente pues viene el problema de la pandemia, no llegan los insumos, el costo de importación, el tiempo de importaciones de Asia para materia prima a América se retrasa, se hace ya muy esporádico, muy caro. Nos lleva a un nuevo contexto donde viene una revisión de riesgos. El tema de riesgos creo que es algo muy importante. Entonces hacemos un diagnóstico hacia adentro de AMELAF, nos damos cuenta que somos muy vulnerables, yo creo que eso pasó en todo el mundo, que hay riesgos importantes. Y también aunado a esto, algo que nos animó, es algo que se ha estado comentando, es el diálogo de alto nivel de los presidentes, donde se menciona el tema de pharma, ¿no? Creo que es importante, lo mencionaron de manera tímida, no de manera tan fuerte como otros temas como son los semiconductores, pero se menciona lo farmacéutico. Entonces, con eso y con la situación que estábamos sintiendo dentro de la asociación, que por cierto son todas empresas privadas, segunda, tercera generación, la mayoría de ellas, pues nos lleva a un replanteamiento de para dónde caminar. En ese sentido, hicimos un primer viaje a Washington hace un año aproximadamente, donde tuvimos reuniones con gente del Departamento de Estado, del Departamento de Comercio, del Departamento de Salud, para tentar el agua y ver cómo percibían esta situación que nos preocupa mucho a nosotros como industria. Aquí hay un tema que también yo creo que es importante y que acaba de mencionar Eduardo, es el tema de costos. El tema de costos es difícil ponderarlo, hay que pensar también que la industria farma se mueve a una velocidad totalmente distinta que otros sectores económicos. Y cuando hablamos de costos, yo creo que no tenemos que pensar únicamente en el costo de manufactura, tenemos que pensar en otro tipo de costos. Y para nosotros lo más importante es poner por delante al paciente. No hay nada más costoso que no le llegue un medicamento a tiempo a un paciente, y todo tipo de enfermedades. Y si pensamos en las enfermedades crónico-degenerativas, como es el cáncer, como es diabetes, enfermedades como lo que se requiere en materia de ansiolíticos, pues se le deja de dar medicamento a una persona y el costo va a ser muy alto para la sociedad, para la persona y para todo el mundo. También, sin embargo, esto sería, digamos, un costo que habrá que pensar. En cuanto a costos de fabricación, pues también hay, el nuevo contexto nos lleva a un cambio de mentalidad, donde las empresas se dan cuenta que no pueden trabajar bajo un esquema de just in time, como estaban operando, tienen que empezar a manejar sus esquemas de otra forma. Pero también algo que iniciamos en AMELAF hace también 2 años, es un programa de cadena de suministro. Un programa de cadena de suministro que está pensando en 2 sentidos. En un sentido hacia cómo podemos aprovisionarnos de materia prima como APIs, que vienen básicamente de Asia. Y es algo que nos preocupa, esa dependencia, que a final de cuentas pues eso impacta directamente a costos y a riesgos. Pero también estamos trabajando en cadena de suministro, no solamente en cuanto a materia prima, sino también en cuanto a la cadena de suministro local. ¿Qué quiere decir? ¿Qué hemos hecho? Que están subiendo los laboratorios, quiénes son sus proveedores de muchos servicios de ingeniería, cajas, empaques, o sea, 1000 cosas, pero lo estamos subiendo a una plataforma. Esto hace también que los que se encargan de compras en los laboratorios empiecen a ver nuevas opciones. No necesariamente tiene que implicar un costo mayor, puede incluso reducirse algunos costos. Y aquí es donde la asociación, cuando hablamos de 80 plantas, pues tiene un poder de compra importante. Y el hecho de subir a proveedores a esta plataforma, pues creo que es ayuda a que algunos proveedores que no son conocidos puedan ser conocidos por otros laboratorios, pero definitivamente en esta estrategia estamos pensando en un esquema regional. Lo que queremos nosotros es ver de qué manera podemos tener una mayor integración con Estados Unidos y que en un momento dado pues pueda esto también garantizar y depender menos de otras zonas del mundo. Que ese fenómeno de la globalización pues nos ha afectado y sobre todo pues corremos riesgos importantes como industria. Entonces, pues esto implica pues anticiparse, reconocemos y reconocer la importancia de fortalecimiento de la cadena de suministro y tenemos que trabajar. Hay temas de corto plazo que se tienen que resolver, pero por la misma velocidad reloj Pharma se tiene que pensar en el largo plazo. Tenemos que pensar ¿qué queremos? ¿Qué queremos no ahorita el año que entra? ¿Qué queremos en 10, 15, 20 años? Queremos fortalecer esta cadena de suministro. Tenemos ejemplos de industrias que lo han logrado de manera muy exitosa, como es la industria automotriz. Pues yo creo que en materia de Pharma es algo que no se ha hecho por comodidad, por situación de confort. Tenemos mucho que trabajar y creo que este tipo de eventos, este tipo de seminarios nos hacen reflexionar, pensar, nos dejan tareas importantes y creo que tenemos que trabajar rutas que vean el corto plazo, pero también el largo plazo. Y a final de cuentas, pues es importante que participen todos los actores. Es fundamental la parte regulatoria, qué bueno que está aquí la FDA, que participó COFEPRIS, porque esta parte de armonización, de reconocimiento de registros, juega un papel fundamental. La parte regulatoria es el corazón, es la columna vertebral de la industria farmacéutica. Queremos que haya una regulación, no estamos en contra de ella, al contrario, queremos que haya una buena regulación, transparente, clara, con criterios uniformes, porque esto da certidumbre y esto permite a la industria planear, planear y ante una situación de crisis de cadena de suministro, pues también tenemos que cuidar los riesgos. Si hay un error, el riesgo es mayor, y el riesgo es mayor no solamente para la parte industrial, sino sobre todo, como comenté al principio, para el paciente.
Muchas gracias, Juan. Muy relevantes reflexiones que ahorita retomamos en términos de esa visión del paciente. Pasamos ahora con Cristóbal Thompson. Cristóbal ha estado a cargo de la MIF por más de 10 años, es un gran conocedor del sistema de salud y sobre todo esta visión y perspectiva de parte de la industria internacional. Entonces, Cristóbal, platícanos un poco más cómo se ve este tema de Nearshoring desde la perspectiva de los laboratorios de investigación y desarrollo y qué tan viable ves esta posibilidad de promover el Nearshoring por parte de los productos que se manejan, sobre todo en la cadena de valor que incluye la investigación.
Hola Eduardo, buenas tardes a todos. Me da mucho gusto saludarte. Saludo a Connie Lozada con mucho gusto, que además de representar a Pfizer es la presidenta actuante de AMIF. Andrew, great to see you. Juan, querido Juan, qué gusto verte. Primero, de acuerdo con todo lo dicho por Juan, a ver, México está entre las 15 economías más importantes del mundo. Tenemos acuerdos comerciales, por supuesto, el más grande del mundo en el TEMEC o el USMCA con Estados Unidos y Canadá. Y por todas las ventajas que presenta México, la oportunidad de incrementar esa sociedad que tenemos con América del Norte y, por ejemplo, con Latinoamérica, tal vez sea la oportunidad más grande que tiene la región. El hecho de que tengamos una población promedio de no más de 28 años quiere decir que tenemos un bono demográfico laborable y una fuerza de trabajo muy importante que es una ventaja absolutamente competitiva como país. Por otro lado, cuando uno ve, y lo ha dicho Juan, el paciente, la persona primero, hay dos cosas, por ejemplo, en el mercado mexicano, que hacen que primero el sector salud es el sector con educación más importante y por supuesto la industria farmacéutica es un actor absolutamente clave y estratégico para el país. Lo vimos en la pandemia, la dependencia de Asia es complicada, necesitamos modificar eso y creo que hay una gran oportunidad. Pero otra vez más, cuando uno ve la población en México, y hablamos de la persona primero y el paciente, por un lado tenemos una población arriba de 60 años que hoy es una población pequeña, 10-12%, pero va creciendo, natural, ciclo de vida de las personas. Por otro lado tenemos una población joven y una población en necesidad, con mucha necesidad de tratamientos de todo tipo, y mantener una población sana y educada va a ser la clave para el desarrollo del país y para que podamos alcanzar un mucho mayor nivel de desarrollo y estar probablemente en los siguientes 10-15 años en la séptima o octava economía del mundo. ¿Cómo lo vemos de la industria de innovación? AMIF representa a 60 compañías, 33 compañías farmacéuticas, algunas nacionales, internacionales, de investigación, muy importantes. Tenemos también y hemos ampliado nuestra posibilidad de traer como aliados a todas las compañías de investigación clínica, que es el paso inicial para lograr un ecosistema de innovación en el país. Y también hoy hemos sumado compañías de dispositivos. Todos sabemos el impacto que tienen los dispositivos, sobre todo en el área de frontera. Seguimos teniendo en total, en la suma de compañías, casi 40 plantas en el país, con una fabricación muy importante. Seguramente Connie podrá hablar un poco más de eso. Así que vemos una gran oportunidad de integración. Como le dijo Juan, hay sectores como el sector automotriz muy integrados. Creo que esa zona de confort que mencionaba Juan es un área de oportunidad que tenemos para sacudirnos el polvo y empezar a hacer cambios. Y dos cosas fundamentales. El tema regulatorio es un tema crítico. Para nosotros el tema de la entidad regulatoria es crítica. Hoy reconozco ayer ya la revisión y probablemente aprobación de vacunas, pero por otro lado hay demoras en aprobación, casi 4.500 trámites demorados, 99 moléculas que llevan más de 30 meses sin aprobación, y obviamente el acceso es un área de oportunidad muy grande. Y en el área de investigación clínica, la industria en general en promedio invertía aproximadamente $250 millones anuales. Hemos dicho que podríamos subir esa cantidad a casi $750 millones. Eso quiere decir que en un sexenio podríamos traer al país $3.000 millones en tratamientos tempranos, en derrama económica al país, pero para ello se necesita tener tiempos competitivos de aprobación de protocolos entre 60 y 90 días, que es lo que tiene Estados Unidos. EMA es uno de los mercados más importantes del mundo, y ahí sí hay un área de oportunidad. Nos está llevando más de un año a aprobar protocolos. Hoy hemos perdido impacto en investigación y ahora ya bajamos a casi $200 millones cuando tenemos un área, tanto hospitales como investigadores de primer nivel. Así que ahí hay un área muy importante para el desarrollo del sector innovador, y no tenemos duda que México está llamado a ser una potencia, pero tenemos todavía áreas de trabajo. Pero desde el punto de vista de Nearshoring, creemos que México tiene todo para recibir nuevas inversiones, tener más seguridad y menos dependencia, pero de eso dependerá también una serie de acciones que tenemos que mejorar en toda la cadena de valor para acelerar esos procesos. Y hasta aquí me quedo, Eduardo.
Cristóbal, muchas gracias. Muy interesante como siempre. Ahora vamos a regresar a la perspectiva de los laboratorios nacionales. Nos acompaña Javier Aceves, director de una de las empresas más grandes farmacéuticas de México, PISA, basada en Guadalajara. También nos acompañan en la audiencia dos dueños de dos laboratorios muy importantes, Fernando Ridel de SBLE y Alejandro Cepeda de Seico, nada más para demostrar el compromiso y la importancia que hay sobre este tema por parte de la industria nacional. Javier, si nos pudieras comentar la perspectiva desde la producción, desde dueño, y sobre todo algo que comentamos hace rato. La industria nacional está acostumbrada a producir para grandes compradores nacionales, que por lo regular son gobiernos. Sé que hay mucha participación privada, pero esto es un cambio de paradigma en la visión de quiénes son tus futuros clientes de la producción. Entonces, ¿está preparada la industria nacional para hacer este cambio?
Yes, I think it is. First, I want to apologize to my Mexican colleagues because they heard this speech in the morning, and some dear U.S. officials. But my mother said that repetition is key. So I would like to share PISA's experience. 70-year-old company, 3 generations, 26,000 employees, very comfortable, selling mostly in Mexico, a little bit in Latam. And then COVID and other circumstances made the company worry. And we all humans know we will die, but a company, especially PISA, never wants to die. So I say, okay, we want to live another 200 years. What do we need to do to survive for that period of time? And the most important realization was that the United States was strategic in this endeavor to make the company stronger than ever. And not only look at the U.S. as a client, but also as a supplier. So we started looking into places to put a plant in the U.S., and we decided in Waco, Texas. And I would come very often, and we have a breakfast table with the judge, with the city mayor, with the councilman, and we would have breakfast burritos, brisket breakfast burritos. And of course, with a full belly, we will speak about God, we will speak about country, and a lot of things. And once the judge grabbed my arm, he was very emotional, and I got very emotional too, because he said, Javier, we have so much in common. We share the same values. And those values are, I think, the love for our country. He loved the US, and I love very much Mexico. He was very proud of Waco and Texas, and I'm very proud of Guadalajara. And we love our families, We love our families, and we also have a very strong connection with the earth, with the Mother Earth, and with God, And I think if you share the same values, can you make, we are so much alike and so different, so close and so apart, but can we make a friendship on these values and do economic trade on these same values? And I think we will have a very long-term solution, And we want to have a long-term solution because we want to survive another 200 years, at least. And building a plant in the US, it's 3-4 times more expensive than building the plant in Mexico, and it surely will be more expensive to operate, as Eduardo asked me to mention about the cost. So it is a very heavy burden on the company, but we understand that if we don't want to chase the nickels, the 5 cents profits, we need to find solutions like this. We also have one of the largest oncological products plant is Pharma 4.0 in Mexico, and it's about ready to start production, and that plant can cover all the needs for Mexico, and with only 10%, 15% utilization. So I would ask the owner, you don't sell to the US, you sell a little in Latam. Why you want to build a plant this big, And they said, well, more people get sick, and we're sure that if we make the investment, it will work, The truth is that the company has zero debt. They don't like planes, they don't like cars, they don't like boats. So what are they going to spend the company's money on? The company in 70 years has made a profit almost in every year, and so they like buying machines. We need to put a branch of Machinery Anonymous or something like that for these guys. You'd be amazed how many machines they buy, no? And Lee was asking me, what products does it make? And I said, Lee, I cannot not even pronounce the names. I sent a message to the company, please tell me which products we can make that are currently on the emergency list. And now, please don't hate me because of my accent, but it's capecitabine, carboplatin, cisplatin, citarabine, dacarbazine, metrorexat in tablets and in solution. As you can tell, I'm not a pharma guy, I'm a finance guy. We would like to be friends with you guys. It's the first time we're together. Trust and hard work will get us there. Of course, we need direction from the governments and policy to go the faster route. But I think we have everything to make this very successful.
Muchas gracias, Javier. Como vimos, ya hay pasos concretos de integración por parte de la industria. No estamos empezando de cero, lo cual es una gran noticia. Y ahora pasamos con Constanza Lozada, CEO de Pfizer. En este caso, Constanza, Pfizer ya es una empresa transnacional que maneja cadenas integradas de valor. Es una visión mucho más amplia. ¿Y cómo ves las posibilidades en México, las condiciones para que se integre la cadena desde la perspectiva de una empresa tan importante con una presencia en producción en México como es Pfizer?
Bueno, antes que nada, muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Para mí es un honor poder estar aquí presente. Estaba preparada para hacer uso de mi inglés con acento fuerte, pero bueno, voy a usar la oportunidad de hacerlo directamente en español. Bueno, como mencionas, yo soy CEO de Pfizer México y como mencionó Chris, tengo también en este momento también el honor de poder representar como presidenta de AMIF, a la industria de innovación en México. Creo que son momentos, digamos, de grandes oportunidades para este país, ¿no? Y creo que la industria farmacéutica, lo escuchábamos hoy también reforzar de la Secretaria de Economía, que la industria farmacéutica y de dispositivos médicos está dentro de las industrias prioritarias que están considerando en esta oportunidad del Nearshoring, ¿no? Y por eso también esta implementación de esta política fiscal que promovería avanzar en ese sentido. Probablemente sea repetitiva con algunos de los conceptos que mencionó Cristóbal, ¿no? Pero creo que si tuviera que mencionar dos grandes condiciones para que esto suceda, como tú mencionabas, nosotros en Pfizer México tenemos una planta que está operando aquí en el país desde 1958, donde no solamente manufacturamos para el país, sino también que exportamos al resto de Latinoamérica. Y por supuesto que vemos con interés esta oportunidad del Nearshoring y también como industria de investigación clínica también vemos reconocemos la oportunidad que tenemos aquí en México, ¿no? Entonces, dos condiciones para que esto pueda fomentarse, como te digo, en consonancia con lo que mencionó ya Cristóbal, es la certeza regulatoria y también el apoyo a la innovación, ¿no? En términos de certeza regulatoria, digamos, es crítico asegurar que las compañías que operamos en ambos países tengamos esta certeza para poder incrementar las inversiones en el país. Por supuesto, celebramos la oportunidad de trabajar ambos países en conjunto. Hoy en día, digamos, estamos enfrentando desafíos en México. Tenemos en este momento, por ejemplo, rezagos en la aprobación de nuevos registros sanitarios o también de modificaciones. Han habido mejoras, pero todavía seguimos en ese proceso. Creo que es bueno tener ese diálogo abierto que tenemos en este momento con la entidad regulatoria y también vemos con buenos ojos decisiones que se han tomado como esta regulación de certeza regulatoria que ya ha hecho pública el gobierno, pero donde básicamente hay dos ámbitos donde creemos que hay una gran oportunidad, que es en el reliance, que esto permitiría, por ejemplo, digamos, registros sanitarios que han sido aprobados por agencias regulatorias de referencia, como puede ser, por supuesto, en este caso de la FDA, tengan un proceso más acelerado en el país y también, por supuesto, el uso de la tecnología de digitalización, ¿no? Esos son dos ejemplos de cómo se puede acelerar esta certeza regulatoria, pero sí creemos que es una condición fundamental. Hoy en día seguimos viendo retrasos en el acceso a medicinas de innovación en México en relación con otros países, y sí creemos que incluso más allá de la industria farmacéutica, cuando hablamos de la oportunidad que representa el Nearshoring para México, México necesita una población sana y productiva, ¿no? Y para tener una población sana y productiva hay que atender desde la prevención y la promoción de la salud, pero también hoy en día tiene una realidad México de una carga de enfermedades no transmisibles muy importante y es realmente crítico asegurar el acceso a medicamentos y a nuevas terapias que están disponibles ya globalmente, ¿no? Entonces creo que esa es una problemática que hay que atender en ese sentido y, como te decía, la certeza regulatoria creo que es, como bien ya han mencionado varios de mis colegas, fundamental para poder avanzar en la cadena de suministro y en maximizar la oportunidad del nearshoring. El otro es el apoyo a la innovación, ¿no? Crear un ecosistema que apoye el sector de salud es una precondición. Bueno, todos saben que hemos firmado el USMCA o el TMEC con América del Norte y contiene varias consideraciones que están alineadas con las mejores prácticas internacionales, que cuando se aplican lo que hacen es crear un ecosistema favorable, ¿no? México, en consonancia con los compromisos del TMEC, actualizó su ley de propiedad intelectual en el 2020, aún está pendiente la regulación de esa ley, ¿no? Y eso, la regulación es importante para dar certezas y entender, digamos, detalles de cómo aplica, por ejemplo, el tema del linkage en el caso de nuevos registros sanitarios, ¿no? Y también la protección de nuevos datos. Creo que en general, que esos son los dos puntos que me gustaría tocar en este sentido. Creo que hemos pasado hace poco, por más que todos nos queremos olvidar, por una crisis sanitaria a nivel global que demostró que la innovación es crítica para un crecimiento sostenible de las economías de los países y para lograr el bienestar social. Así que creo que como industria, como actor de este sector salud, tenemos un gran papel y compromiso para que tenemos que ejercer y aún más en un país como México, con esta oportunidad que existe con el nearshoring y poder también tener cadenas de suministros más resilientes.
Muchísimas gracias, Constanza. Opinión muy importante desde la industria farmacéutica. Vamos ahora a abrir una discusión un poco más amplia. Si levantan la mano y nada más se presentan, y en su caso si es un comentario que sea breve y si es una pregunta que sea dirigida a alguno de los ponentes. Hay una serie de temas mientras piensan en sus preguntas que yo creo que es muy relevante para esto en términos de política. No lejos de la industria farmacéutica está la industria de dispositivos. Y la industria de dispositivos comparte mucho de la problemática y sin embargo ha sido un éxito en México la integración de cadenas de suministro en la parte de dispositivos. Hay plantas, no sé si ustedes saben, pero del otro lado de San Diego, en Tijuana, se produce una gran cantidad, si no es la gran mayoría de los ventiladores que se utilizaban en tiempos de la pandemia. Las bombas de infusión se producen en Ciudad Juárez. Entonces, ya existen modelos de éxitos en el sector salud de integración de cadenas. Seguramente salud es un poco distinta, tiene por supuesto la complejidad de los precursores y el componente quizás manufacturero de mano de obra es distinta al tema de la industria, la cadena es distinta. Pero valdría la pena escuchar algunas de las observaciones y después permitir al cierre una réplica por parte de nuestros ponentes muy breve.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm going to try my Spanglish here. My name is Fernando Riedel. I come from a company called SBL Pharma. We're in the we're in the Baja California region, south of the border, mentioning San Diego. We've been witness of this tremendous growth of the medical device industry for over the years in the maquiladora industry, but also in the pharmaceutical sector. We're not we also have had the experience of not only the national consumer of pharmaceuticals in Mexico, government and the private sector, but also having been in the border, of course, all the people that cannot purchase, can't afford the affordable care in the U.S. that has happened. They've come and buy the products that the industry manufactures, not only from the U.S., but also Europe and other countries. So we are in the industry are very keyed on having the international standards and the quality of production of pharmaceuticals. The API industry in Mexico has decreased, of course, but is also an area that the generic industry, we're looking for investing in API manufacturers in Mexico to be able to not rely on other countries because of what we've seen in the pandemic that was already been discussed here. Just adding a little bit what the gentleman said about the California, the Baja California area, that our industry is concentrated mostly in Mexico City, in Guadalajara, but there's also pharmaceutical manufactured specs over there in the Baja region that we're catering to the Mexican industry market, but as well as other countries, like we mentioned, Latin America and Europe. We have the resources, the human resources in Mexico with the universities. There are pharmaceutical enthusiasts and professionals. The universities are producing high-quality chemists and the chemists that the Mexico needs to be able to become a key player in the production of quality manufacturing of quality goods, but also we can accommodate with our infrastructure that we have to other countries. And this is why one of the reasons that we're here, and to measure and how can we help and how can we both countries produce quality and not to rely, like we said, in other countries for our supplies.
¿Alguien más?
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for the Wilson Center and Amela for arranging USP, FDA, and everybody here. I'm Alejandro Cepeda from Laboratorio Seiko. We are a Mexican established company also in Guadalajara, mainly focused in the manufacturing of injections, which is dental cartridges of local anesthetics. Also, we have OTC capabilities for drugs and gels solutions, and we have been continuously, as a family-owned company and a Mexican company, we are the main brand in the Mexican market, and we also export to a numerous countries outside the U.S. or Europe. So we've been working very diligently in trying to improve our standards in order to seek a FDA inspection. So the reason that we are here is to also, we are making a lot of investments to add installed capacity. We are making a new laboratory for be prepared not just to continue in the local anesthetic business, but to be able to offer installed capacity for single dose injections. So our commitment, as an example of the other pharmaceutical companies, members of MELAF, is to continue openly working and making all the necessary investments, USP alignments, and all the necessary controls to be able to build our brick or our grain of sand in building the supply chain that, of course, is one of our main scopes as a pharmaceutical company established in Mexico. So thank you very much for inviting and having us here.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Any other questions? Before we wrap up, I'm going to go back with the panelists in reverse order, like Anthony did. And I'm going to ask them, if you were to have the opportunity to sit with the president-elect, and we're going to have a women president if everything goes as planned, for the first time in Mexico in about a year's time, a little bit. If we were to sit with her and ask her one thing to make nearshoring and pharmaceutical supplies happen, what would that one thing be from your perspective? But we'll save that for last. Just think about what would happen if you get that opportunity. Any other questions you might want to ask the panelists? Pretty quiet. Yes, Kevin.
Thank you for your presentations. I guess the question I would have for the group here is, obviously there's been a lot of discussion regarding the need to do something like this. We have obviously a vantage point of, we've been thinking about onshoring, nearshoring for several years. I'd like to hear your perspective though. What is it, how would you envision, as the representatives of the pharmaceutical industry in Mexico, of what the next 3 years would look like if this was to move off center and something actually concrete would start to be put in place? What would you like to see?
Muy buena pregunta de Kevin. And the timing is just right because Mexico is moving towards the planning phase. There's all the proposals that want to be, let's say, put on the table for the next administration. And hopefully the administration or the president will be in listening mood in the next 6 to 8 months. And then the planning phase and eventually the policy changes will take place. So the question is very relevant for the times that we're living in Mexico. ¿Alguien quisiera tomar Adelante, Juan.
Well, I think you made a very good question. And definitely what we're going to do is we have to walk step by step. And here we have 4 laboratories present, but we have identified among the 45 labs that we have in the association, there are a number of labs that have showed strong interest in nearshoring and in working closer with the United States. So what we'll do is, after this seminar, which has been very, very useful, and I hope it's not the first, we have more seminars on this subject because it's a critical subject for everybody. We will gather and we'll have a meeting, and that's something I have discussed with some of the reps that are here. And from there, we will define in which direction we will move. We will have this early in November. So we'll identify who's interested, and from there, we will carry on and identify in which direction we can move in a very pragmatic way, thinking both in the short term, but also in the long term. And I think we're going to be defining also what's going to be our agenda for next year. We have to think of in which direction we're going to move. There are a lot of things there's strong homework that we're taking, but we have to be precise because there's so much to do that it's very easy to get lost. And I think if we work together, the Mexican private sector, the international companies that are based in Mexico, represented by AMIF, we have the regulatory the agencies. We have also the private sector in the United States, and we begin to identify which are the critical areas where we should focus in the short term, and we define a program. Then I think we can move forward. Definitely, there has to be follow-up. A lot of ideas are shared in a table like this, very useful, but we have to move forward and define an agenda and from there we will be moving and following up, and I think that's the way to work it out in the near future.
Thank you, Juan. Yes, Anthony. I have another point I want to make about the benefits of integrating transparency end to end, but go ahead. No, there's another point which was raised on the transparency and having more control of the chain and transparency of the end-to-end beyond improving the quality of pharmaceuticals. It also has a side benefit, which I've discussed with Andrew, of control of undesirable trade in APIs that are used for other things, most familiarly fentanyl. So there's side products to the benefits. We're talking about the cost, we're talking about the benefits. The benefits of bringing in a supply chain which is much more scrutinized also has some important side effects in terms of promoting a closer ties and better relationships with the United States. So I just wanted to put that point in the table. Back to you, Anthony.
Thank you. That's a very good point. I wanted to I have a question, but I also wanted to make a little comment that there was one market dynamic that I don't think we've talked about, which is important from our dialogues here on supply chain resilience in the U.S., which is the health plans. We've talked about drug shortages, and there's an awful lot of dialogue now among health plans where most drugs are purchased. The U.S. government does not purchase, it pays for, but most of the time they're not purchasing drugs, for instance. It's health plans, and then they go through GPOs and PBMs, and there's quite a bit of dialogue about paying for resilient supply chains. How do they? They want to. They don't want to be stuck in a position where they can't provide medicines to their patients or their hospitals because they're on shortage. And I guess where I was going with this is how do you see this? Like, do you have, before you can get into that dialogue, you probably need an approval. But you don't want to seek the approval until you know that there's an opportunity. So it feels like there's a big chicken and egg, which comes first. Is that right? Just to really simplify one element of it, and to add that, this health plan element, I think, is another one that's worth exploring as you think about the market opportunity.
A very important question.
Here's the chicken. Here's the egg.
Well, we're aligned.
He knew the question was coming. Sí, adelante.
For example, from our side, what I think that pharmaceutical companies should do and what we're going to do are actually doing is get out of our comfort zone that is only mainly focusing on coffee-breeze and these not that stringent regulatory authorities like FDA, and start looking for to be prepared as an installed capacity manufacturer quality in case of need, and also to get the medicines, the generic drugs shortage that you have. So, for example, on our side that we're currently not selling to USA, we will speed up the process of getting the inspection and would like to be able to get in communication to see what gaps you see and which the strategies have to be aligned in our investment focus and our changes focus in order to get it quicker, instead of chicken and egg, or instead of being afraid of getting the visit and getting, for our side, we are open to see receiving and see the necessary steps and the necessary changes, because we are fully, all of our laboratories, we trust on the quality and efficacy and efficiency of the drugs we make. And this is why we've been very successful with our own population. So we think that the only gap is how do we fit our existing regulations and our existing working ways with the FDA wants and expected needed for us for you to approve and to see us as a trusted manufacturer for what you need. So it's to get out of comfort zone and start working towards establishing and building those bridges, and we can see exactly what we need to change and start. Of course, we need a communication channel and to be able to be doing these visits without the fear of calling.
I could just add a few things. I just to echo a few things that you've said, or highlight a few things that you've said. I think it's important that companies make good business decisions, like you've indicated, in terms of being in a specific comfort zone from a business perspective. But I'll also highlight where the importance of regulatory reliance is, but also the importance of international harmonization. That where you highlighted the importance of understanding where a facility or a firm would have an understanding of the transparency of where things align. That's where international harmonization comes into play. And I think it's really important for there to be an acknowledgement that it's important for the United States and for Mexico to have that international harmonization, and there are already international harmonized approaches for many of the things that we have been speaking about today. But those international harmonized approaches need to be used, and they need to be used consistency to make sure that there is regulatory certainty. It's that regulatory certainty that removes obstacles. And so I think you've highlighted a few things that we need to make sure are being addressed.
Thank you, Lee.
Excuse me, I just wanted to add a little point there. We're going to definitely make use of your office in Mexico City of the FDA. He was talking about bridges, and one of the bridges that we've made, thanks to the AMALAF approach and our collaboration now with the USP, that we're having all that important knowledge that the USP has had and can create for so many years. We are very active, and we're very putting attention to that, and I believe that the Mexican COFEPRIS, of course, has always been trying to remember peaks and also the harmonization that Commissioner Schwartz mentioned, the commitment that COFEPRIS has now with the harmonization with the ICH plays very important. We as industrial pharmaceutical, we want to have that open policy, doors open for FDA and for COFEPRIS, for them to visit our plants as many times whenever you guys want. You don't have to call. Just show up. I've always told this to COFEPRIS. It makes our life a lot easier. It makes me sleep at night and my family, because they take what we produce. And for us to know exactly that the quality that we have makes good peace of mind. And we're definitely going to take your word on the FDA office there in the U.S. Embassy. We're going to receive a lot of calls from us right now. Thank you.
Just to add to that, if you already have a communication from our office, from another office, you probably want to use that communication as your primary point of contact. But if it's a different question, use the U.S. Embassy. So if you have a primary communication, use that primary communication, because you don't want to mix apples and oranges. But if you don't have a primary communication already, use the U.S. Embassy to answer your questions.
You can also use.
And if I can, I don't know if you can hear me in the room, but I'm the health attaché at the embassy, at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico, and FDA and CDC are parts of our office here. So happy to serve as that point of contact, and obviously we work very closely with our colleagues from the Foreign Commercial Service, and through that collaboration is that we've been in touch with Andrew and Efrain. So happy to help in that regard and route the things appropriately, either to the Foreign Commercial Service or FDA here in Mexico City. So, a la orden.
Thank you. Important precision. So let's take a last question from Christina, and then we'll go through the final remarks from our panelists.
Thank you very much. It's just a comment regarding the work that we have been doing with FDA. from the representation in Mexico and Latin America with Ms. Patricia Pineda, and she has been very kindful for us, and not only during the inspections that are being conducted in the facilities of the Mexican companies, but also in the capacitation, in the training of our human resources. They have translated, and I don't know if everybody is aware that they have launched recently, like a couple of days ago, as subtitled titles in all the courses that FDA gives freely. So we are very thankful for that, and we are preparing another list of courses and webinars and so on that we want to know. They are not only giving us information about the generics and all the compliance that we have to do, but also communicating with another regulatory agency. So thank you very much. I'm taking this opportunity to thank you. And in AMLAB, we will be continuing with that opportunity, and maybe asking not only for the translation of the courses, but maybe another type of close communication regarding all these long and short-term objectives that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe I could add one additional thing. One of the questions we had kind of thought proactively during our panel session was what else could be done to make sure that things are appropriate and people understand the regulatory requirements to facilitate onshoring or nearshoring. One of the things that's really helpful for these efforts is making sure that organizations and industry understand the requirements to meet our needs, or the standards for importation into the United States, and vice versa, quite frankly. One of the things that was really helpful when I served overseas was when we went out and gathered information about the programs or processes that were not well understood in country. What I'm hearing from you is that you work really closely with our office in Mexico City, and you frequently provide that information to the office to help them understand what is maybe not as well understood. It's really helpful if something is not understood for that information to be conveyed to our counterparts in Mexico City for two different reasons. We just don't know sometimes. It's really much more advantageous for us to hear from individuals in country. So if you have information, provide that to our colleagues in Mexico City. That's really helpful. We provide, as she indicated, translations for our peers to make sure that we're providing it as broadly as possible. It helps not just you, but anyone in Latin America. And so what you're saying to us is heard, and we make changes as quickly as possible. So maybe that it would be the best thing for me to say.
Thank you, Lee. So let's wrap up, and I just want to echo Tony's comment. If I understood that correctly, how you build into the system a premium or some sort of incentives on the PBM or the user, so it incentivizes back reliability and resilience into the supply chain. That's I think it's missing. You have to signal Mexican producers that they will be rewarded for a consistent supply chain that is not only the quality of the product, but the reliability of the supply. So let's go back in reverse order. Constanza, what would be your main message in terms of what needs to change to make this happen?
Thank you very much. So I would say that there are many elements to be considered. Many of them we were extensively discussing here. I would say we need the rule of law. We need the protection of intellectual property, an efficient and effective, high-quality regulatory environment, certainty in local and international market access, and availability of highly qualified human capital, and of course, security. That would be my Christmas list, all the things that I believe are really important in order to maximize the opportunity and in this nearshoring aspect.
It's a wonderful list. Thank you, Constanza. Javier?
Very short. So we're making every effort. The company is fully committed. We have a team of around 150 people working on this project. We are very thankful for the U.S. because he educated a lot of these people, some in Harvard, some in Stanford, and every resource of the company is being put in on this, and we're taking the effort. And as you can see, I went for dinner last night. It was not lunch with these guys, and we were all tired. But he started speaking also of machinery. His face light up, and he said, "I'm doubling capacity." No? I didn't ask where you want to sell the product, but he was so happy. I mean, he was going to go to this fair and this and that, and so I think also very important to us. We are in the long term. We're not public companies. The reason we do this, if we are not going to sell the company, if we're not after those 5 cents, what is the motivation for us to do this? No? And I really speak from my heart. I think we share the values that we want to help. We want to do something meaningful. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Cristobal, we know that you're working on some proposals for the new government to improve and enhance the pharmaceutical industry. Can you give us a peek of which one of these are relevant for nearshoring and can make things different?
Yes, Eduardo, I think Connie covered very well all the aspects. What I would say is, number one, we need health to be the number one priority of next administration. Health is the number one detonator of development. If that's a reality, pharmaceuticals are critical. Having a strategic plan, long-term plan with certainty. If you want to have investments in facilities, in plants, in long-term development, you need certainty. This is a business of, Connie said it very well, certainly rule of law. We have that in place. I'm sure that the investments will increase from national companies, international companies who have been around in Mexico for more than, some of them, 100 years. The market is very big in Mexico. The North American market, the USMCA is great. Latin America is a great opportunity. So I think the country has to think health number one, pharmaceuticals, those are some critical points for the future. And I heard Juan at the beginning, having a value chain is not only international, it's local. We've got to make sure the value chain reaches the place where the patient needs the medicine. And I think that is also international, but also national. And taking some of the ideas from the post-pandemic preparedness, the G7, G20 talking about, there's a full plan there. We hope Mexico's part of the G20, that we can follow that plan. Because again, we were caught short, like most countries in the world, with a pandemic. It's the good time right now to take the right decisions long-term to make sure that whatever happens benefits our patients.
Thank you, Cristobal. Wonderful message. And Juan, would you like to wrap up with your recommendations?
Yes, I'll focus in one recommendation. Connie made a good list, but I think you said that we had only chance to say one recommendation. So my recommendation would be communication, to have efficient communication, constructive communication with the government. For me, that would be the key element that I would ask. Because from there, we can unwrap all the subjects like they have mentioned, and in terms of regulatory matters, communication is very important, that we understand what's happening, and also we transmit this in one ventanilla. My English, I'm losing my English, sorry. One point of contact, so we can transmit to all the regulatory people in the industry what's happening, instead of having 45 guys or ladies knocking the door. You can do it through one channel. But my recommendation would be communication. I think communication is the most important. From there, we will unwrap everything. To be constructive, efficient communication between all the actors, especially between the private sector and the governments.
Thank you so much, Juan, and I think that the Mexico Institute will be a great platform to promote that communication. So help me with a round of applause for our excellent panelists. And back to you, Andrew.
Tonya, did you want to make any final comments?
I just
It would
like.
put you on the spot.
No, I actually would like to take a moment just to thank the participants. I would like to thank some of our USB staff, if you don't mind, who put a lot of time, Efren Elias in particular, who leads our advocacy work in Latin America, based in Mexico City. So thank you, Efren, and the other USP staff who put a lot of hard work into this. Also, Amalaf, you know, I'm so impressed by the amount of stakeholder engagement that you're undertaking to do this right and to communicate with stakeholders and to understand how, you know, the priorities of stakeholders here. I think it's fantastic. And I believe that this forum and others that you've had have been great communication tools. And I think the more that stakeholders in the U.S. understand the interest and the opportunity, I think the more traction you'll get. It's hard not to see the great value for everybody in this opportunity. I would also like to thank FIU, the Florida International University, for helping us frame the discussion. Our U.S. government attendees for the time that you spent with us today. The API Consortium. Am I saying that API? It's
Innovation Center.
Innovation Center.
So close.
Thank you so much. And of course to the Wilson Center and Andrew for your organization and leadership. Thank you very much, and thanks everybody. I think it's been a great day.
Andrew, thank you for inviting me to join you in this different way. I've learned a lot today, really. I'm not an expert in pharma. Have been known to use aspirin once in a while, but really enjoyed this tremendously. I would say if there's a phase 2, and I hope there is, we all enjoy an agreement that is not called the USMA, it's called the USMCA. And I think it behooves us to include Canada in this next time. Canada is the 9th largest producer of pharmaceutical products in the world. They have some state-of-the-art R&D centers and laboratories. They do over $30 billion worth of production a year. That'll be going up to $20 billion more than that by 2030. And I think there's also, last time I checked, over 23% of their pharmaceutical production there are generics. So I think it would be a good idea to include them. And besides, in terms of the relation between Canada and Mexico, they jump over the United States for a lot of different reasons, not only technology, but also in terms of the market they want to get to, and also costs, where Mexico has a competitive advantage over the United States. So let's include Canada, even in a small way, even one of the smaller panels.
Great idea. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Echoing Tony's thanks to all of you for participating. It's been great to collaborate with the USP team and particularly with Fran. And I want to recognize the Wilson Center team as well. Samantha Hargy and Quinlan Gray, both of whom started at Wilson pretty recently, so this was the first big event. I think they did a great job with all the logistics. Our intern team that has been busy copiously taking notes, Maria Calderon and Lauren Termott and Eric Marquez. And we will, as we said, the idea is we will incorporate those notes into the paper we circulated and share that with folks to get your feedback, because we do want to make sure in this spirit of including viewpoints and including stakeholders, make sure that folks are comfortable. It doesn't, obviously we can't take every single edit, but we want to make sure that what we said is accurately reflects what happened. And as was said, I think there is opportunity for more conversations, engaging different stakeholders, and we would certainly be delighted to continue to be the place where we have those conversations. We have a reception downstairs on the 4th floor. So on your way out of the building, please stop by, have a drink, continue to network and chat informally. And with that, let me just thank you all again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone.